All right, all right, all right. Irish Breakdown Nation, IB Nation, we are back with another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. You know that dude right there. That's Ryan Roberts. I hope you know me. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are ready to dive into another breakdown of this Notre Dame BYU matchup. This is a very big matchup, Ryan. We are also going to do a mailbag at the end after we're done breaking this down. So if you have some mailbag questions, you can start throwing them in there now. If you have super chat ones, we'll definitely get to those. And those are much appreciated. But Ryan, let's dive into this matchup of Notre Dame BYU. And I want to kind of say something big picture at the beginning. And I noticed something in the chat yesterday in the show that Sean and I were doing. And I think you've noticed it on the message board and on Twitter as well. I don't think a lot of Notre Dame fans appreciate how good this BYU football team is, especially people who only watched them last week against Utah State. Number one, they did not play well against Utah State. Notre Dame lost to Marshall. And two of their best players didn't play in that game, Puka Nacua and Tyler Batty. So we'll get into a lot of that. But this is a good football team. Should Notre Dame beat them? Yes. The reason it's important for people to understand how good this football team is at BYU and the fact that they're 8-2 against Power 5 teams the last 2 years is because if you don't appreciate how good they are, then if Notre Dame wins, then you don't appreciate how good of a win that would be and how important of a win that would be. And that's the reason that we're trying to get people to understand it. This is a quality football team. It's not Ohio State. It's not Clemson or Georgia. We're not saying that. This is a legitimate top 25 football team. And I think a team that Notre Dame is going to have to bring their A game to beat them convincingly and at least bring their BB plus game if they're going to win. This is going to be a good matchup for Notre Dame and a matchup, as we discussed yesterday, Ryan, that's going to tell us a lot about this Notre Dame football team. And we'll see a little bit more of that as we dive into the stats to kind of show people where BYU is dangerous, where Notre Dame can take advantage. But people need to appreciate that this is a good football team that Notre Dame is going to be playing on Saturday.
I mean, you just said the record against Power 5 teams, right? Like it's not like just a smoke and mirror show, right? With BYU, like this is a quality football team. I agree completely, Brian. And it's something where, I mean, on paper, and that's why I'm happy that we're doing the show today. On paper, I think that the stats kind of back up what I saw in film with this BYU team. It's a different football team than I thought I was getting. And I think there are some preconceived notions from people about what BYU football is and what they're going to be good at and what their strengths are going to be. And I think that when you see the numbers kind of match what I saw in film personally, it tells me that this team is not going to be an easy out. And I think that you saw Vegas put the line out. I think it was started at 2.5, and now it's up to 3 or something like that. So even Vegas thinks this is going to be a close, highly contested football game. And it's a big game for both teams, obviously with the Shamrock Series, but also BYU is continuing to prove that they belong on this national stage and that they are that top 25 caliber football team year in and year out. So I think it's a massive opportunity for Notre Dame to really – because last week or 2 weeks ago now against North Carolina, you're like, okay, step in the right direction. Not a great North Carolina team, though, at least not on the defensive side of the football. So you're like, is that a hollow? I don't want to call it a hollow victory because no victory is hollow.
Yeah, it's not hollow at all, but it can be misleading, at least on one side of the ball for Notre Dame.
100%. Yeah. So is your offense really taking that step forward, or is it just the other, the lesser of two evils that like, hey, the defense that you're playing wasn't great, so it's like meeting in the middle somewhere. We will have a big determination of just how much improved this Notre Dame team is this week because they are playing against a quality football team, on a neutral site and a team that wants to beat you. Like they want to beat Notre Dame,
and needs to beat you. And there's a lot at stake for BYU. I mean, they're still a one-loss team. This is going to be a wild college football season. BYU has a great chance to be the highest-ranked non-Power 5 team, which would get them into a major bowl. They're going to have to beat Notre Dame to have a chance to do that. And they've got some other Power 5 wins. And we talked about their 8-2 record over Power 5 teams the last 2 years. Now, obviously, they had a loss to Baylor last year. Baylor went on and won the Big 12 and won the Sugar Bowl, and they got a rematch against Baylor this year, beat them in overtime. Their other loss was to Oregon, who's a pretty good football team right now. They beat USC at USC last year. They smashed Virginia last year, hung up over 60 points. They beat Utah last year convincingly last season. Also beat Arizona State. So this is a good football team. They are very different from last year, Ryan. Even you talk about what people expect. They're not even what I expected when I started watching them play this year. And when you look at what I thought they were going to be good at compared to where they were last year, and that's what we're going to kind of dive into. So what we do today in this part of our matchup, this breakdown, this stacking up breakdown, is we're going to compare different aspects of the game. And it's Notre Dame's rush offense against the rush defense of BYU. I think those are the comparisons that matter, not like which team has the better rushing offense, because those two things don't go against each other. Mm-hmm. And we'll kind of do then the pass offense against the pass defense, scoring and from both units, and then we'll flip it and look at Notre Dame's defense compared to the BYU offense. And then with each one of those sections, Ryan, we'll also talk about some of the personnel matchups that are going to be key to Notre Dame having success, or that maybe worry us a little bit when we talk about this BYU football team. So the first thing that I want to bring up, Ryan, is I want to bring up rush offense against rush defense. Mm-hmm. And this is probably the matchup to me that is most important for Notre Dame, and not even just from a keys to victory standpoint. We'll discuss that more tomorrow, but just from a what are we going to learn about this football team standpoint, Ryan? Because when you look at BYU, they have struggled the last couple of years against the run, and it's not just this year. It's not just, well, they've had some guys out, like Tyler Batty was out against Utah State last week. That matters. He's, in my opinion, and I believe yours as well, he's their best defensive lineman.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't have him last week, but they haven't been good even when he has played at stopping the run. And we saw it this year, and we also saw it last year too, Ryan, because this was a team that wasn't great at stopping the run last season. They're giving up, as we see here, 159.8 yards per game. Well, last year in this matchup, last year on their rush defense, they gave up 157 rushing yards per game. And in the last 2 years, we've talked about how they're 8-2 against Power 5 teams. 7-2 against Power 5 teams. They were 6-1 last year. They're 1-1 so far this year. So 7-2. In those 9 games, Notre Dame or BYU has given up over 180 rushing yards per game, even in wins. And then in the 4 losses they've had the last 2 years, they've given up 219.5 rushing yards per game. So You want to beat BYU? Run the football, right? And they've been really inconsistent at stopping the run. Sometimes they look good, sometimes they don't. This is one of the things that surprises me watching them the last 2 years, because they are big up front. They're pretty physical up front, at least, at times, and they've got really good linebackers. So I'm going to be honest, it took me a while to kind of figure out why they're not better stopping the run. And we'll get into that a little bit during this, but this is the matchup that this is their weakness against what has been a weakness for you for more of the season than it has been a strength. This is the area that we find out, Ryan. Did Notre Dame truly turn a corner on offense, especially running the ball against North Carolina, or is this a team that's still going to kind of struggle? Because BYU is more like Cal than they are North Carolina, in that how they're coached, how they line up, and the fact that they're a big front. They're not nearly as good as Cal, but they are size-wise like Cal. And Notre Dame had a little bit of some problems with the size of Cal as far as moving them off the ball early in the game. Now, eventually they got it going. So I'm really intrigued by this matchup, Ryan. I gave the advantage to Notre Dame in my breakdown, and I have the written form of this breakdown online. But I am very curious to see if Notre Dame can turn the on-paper matchup into an actual, or turn the on-paper advantage into an actual advantage, because they're going to need to if they want to win this football game.
Over-encompassing is that we're going to see if Notre Dame offensively has taken the next step, Ryan. But to your point, and I agree 1,000,000,000%, this is the indicator right here, right? If this is the step forward that Notre Dame needs to take. We saw the offensive line look worlds better the last time they played 2 weeks ago now, or a week and a half, whatever you want to say. They looked a whole lot better against North Carolina. Is that a step, or is that a little bit of a falsity, I guess, is what we want to call it.
Yeah, it's a false sense of hope, right? Because you played a team that's really bad at stopping the run. Right?
Exactly. So this is a step where if Notre Dame's able to establish a run game and be consistent with it all day, I think that is a very positive step and an indicator that, yes, Notre Dame is taking a step forward. Because, like you said, this might not be quite a good team stopping the run as a Cal team, but this is still a pretty quality football team for the most part. They have talent up front is what I should say. You mentioned Tyler Batty early on, big defensive lineman. They have not been as good up front, I think, in a couple years. I remember when they had Kyrus Tonga, who was like a big nose tackle. Like, he was a difficult player to move his last year with Zach Wilson. And I think that's when you saw the run defense at its best. I just don't think that they have quite the interior defensive lineman that they've had in the past. But to your point, when BYU's linebackers are left free and willing to run, I mean, Ben Bywater and Peyton Wilgar and Tooley and those guys, like, they're pretty decent football players, man. Like, there's some talent on that second level. So for me, to your point, Notre Dame's offensive line needs to dominate this football game. Right. They need to set a tone. We saw the flashes of how good Blake Fisher could be last week. He needs to be more consistent with it and take another step forward. And that goes for the whole offensive line and the entirety. Notre Dame has an advantage, I think, not even just rush offense versus rush defense for a second. They have the advantage offensive line versus defensive line, and they have to take advantage of it in this football game.
Because when you look at this BYU football team, Ryan, defensively, they've had a couple games where they did struggle to stop the run from a yardage standpoint. They gave up 212 yards to Oregon. They gave up 204 to Utah State. They only gave up 152 to Baylor, but that was an overtime, and they only allowed Baylor to rush for 2.9 yards per carry. They held South Florida to 4 yards per carry and Wyoming to 3.7 yards per carry. Now, Wyoming's not a great rushing team, right? I mean, so, they're not a great offensive team, period. They're averaging about 153 yards a game right now rushing the football. So, Wyoming, that you held Wyoming to kind of to below where they are in this matchup, with where they are in their season total, but when I look at this team and I say, they haven't been getting ripped up with like a bunch of big runs. Oregon's really the only team that had much success. Utah State had like a couple 20 somethings, a couple big runs but there was also a lot of plays in that game where Utah State tried to run the ball on 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, and got stuffed. Mm-hmm. And so they came up big. So it's one of those things where, can you run on them? Yes. But the point is, you have to earn those yards. And that's why I like this matchup. It's not because, boy, this is a team that should stop you from running the ball. That's not what we're saying. What I am saying, though, is to run on them, you have to earn that. Oregon made a concerted effort to run the ball on them, and it worked. Baylor made a concerted effort to try to run on BYU, and it didn't work. Which one will this be? Will Notre Dame be able to go out and run? Because if they play like they did against Marshall up front, if they play like they did against Ohio State up front, if they play like they did early against Cal up front, they won't run the ball on BYU. If they play like they did against Cal or in the second half, and if they play like they did against North Carolina, then they will, which is, again, going to tell us just what this team has done. And I think the matchup that I'm most intrigued by, Ryan, is going to be the tackle matchup in the run game. Now, BYU does some really funky stuff up front. I shouldn't say funky. I mean, it's basically they're an odd front in their alignment, but they're a 4-down front team in their personnel. Mm-hmm. And they'll slide their fronts and do some evens, over and unders and stuff, but they do a lot of odd stuff. They'll base out of the odd, then shift out of it. And it puts their two big ends, who are 275 plus pounds, on the Notre Dame tackles. And then they'll slant and they'll kind of come off of them. At times they'll come off and just kind of read and react and try to occupy blockers to let the linebackers flow. That's what they do up front. Would you agree with that, Ryan?
100%.
And so that's why they get those big guys. So to me, the best way to beat that, and the teams that have had success against them, so Oregon, for example, really killed them with their zone stuff and their counter stuff. Because what they did was they got really good movement on the double teams, and they especially had success running outside. And Sean talked about this yesterday. Utah State, a lot of their success came on stretch and outside zone, because you get those big boys moving and then push forward, and it makes it a lot easier to then get off to the linebackers. Yep. Because what they're trying to do is keep your front occupied so the linebackers can read and flow to the ball. And for the most part, they're all pretty disciplined, instinctive guys. And so, especially their two inside guys. So I think that's going to be a key, Ryan, is can the tackles get movement on the big guys on the edge? I actually like this matchup up the middle for Notre Dame at center and guard. I think this should favor Notre Dame. Now they've got to execute it, but I think the tackle matchup is going to be interesting, not just against the 5 techniques or the 4 eyes, but also when they have Beatty on the edge. So I'm very curious about that, and I think this is also a game where the Notre Dame tight ends are going to have to block well, because of the way that BYU lines up. So we're going to learn a lot about the young tackles in this game, because that's the area where Notre Dame could have some problems, in my opinion, if they're not able to run the football.
I mean, like you said, they have size on the edge. I mean, you mentioned Tyler Beatty. They'll also run some under fronts, like you said, and they'll put like Peyton Wilgar up on the line of scrimmage and let him be kind of that physical edge setter at 6'3", 245 plus pounds. Like he's their biggest linebacker, right? So they're going to attack the edges a ton on Notre Dame. They're going to try to establish, but to your point, it hasn't really worked a ton, right? Like they're a team that's built inside out. That's why they've been able to get run on a little bit. And, when I kind of did the breakdown of the defensive players for BYU, I mean, I kind of talked about that a little bit, Brian. Like I think that there's a couple players like Tooley on the second level and even Bywater who are good athletes. But for the most part, your front seven is built around being physically dominant against the offensive line in theory and using your length to occupy and to spill things, right? This is not a incredibly fleet of foot front seven, in my opinion. It's a lengthy physical front seven. So getting to the edges, I think, can be very advantageous to your opportunities to run the football. And I think that sets up perfectly for Chris Tyree. Like I want to see Chris Tyree matched up in space against these linebackers. Like I want to see there be a spot, and I know we're talking about rush defense and versus rush offense, but even in opportunities for Notre Dame to just get Chris Tyree out in space as a pass player, in a run player, because I think that you can take advantages getting him isolated against a guy like a Peyton Wilgar who wants to play in the box on the line of scrimmage. Like that's not where his bread is buttered, right? So I think that that's the biggest thing is you always want to make the opposition uncomfortable and working the edges, getting into space, running the football off tackle. Like those things I think could really loosen up this defense and make them extremely uncomfortable, in my opinion.
And when you run up the middle, you have to get a body on their backers. That's when their backers are able to fly downhill and ram into the linemen. That's when they have success. I'm also curious, Ryan, to see if they play more of Keenan Peely this week. Now they'll play like 5 different linebackers a lot. Tooley and Bywater are good players. I think Bywater is a more inside kind of guy. Tooley is rangy. Obviously, Peyton Wilgar is an outside kind of guy. Peely's the one guy that I think can be a bit of a thumper inside. Some games they play him a decent amount. Some games that he's not much of a factor. I think this is a game where if you watch Notre Dame against North Carolina and Cal, you got to be thinking to yourself, we got to get him more involved in this because he's a guy that can match up a little bit. So I'm curious to see if they try to match up in that regard against Notre Dame, because the one thing that's weird about BYU, they list like 15 different starters. And like I have Ryan do this. Ryan does this recruiting comparison, and so the one he sends me, he's got like 15. I'm like, dude, what is this? Like, what are you doing? Like, you've done this before. And then I looked at their depth chart and I was like, oh, this is absurd. So, but the point is they can get into a lot of different looks, Ryan, and that's the point. And I'm curious to see just exactly how they decide to match up against Notre Dame. I have a feeling based on sort of what they've done so far this year or what Notre Dame, I should say, has done so far this year. I think we're going to see them be a lot more aggressive with their linebackers crashing and having their safeties protect, because right now Notre Dame has not presented the kind of pass threat with their receivers to scare BYU. And if I'm BYU, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, I'm going to make them beat me throwing the ball down the field. They're not going to beat me with because what bringing the running backs down into the box does, right? It allows them the safeties, and not only allows them to protect against the run game, but then allows them to be in position to see and run with the running backs in the pass game, which that has been a weapon. They also, which we'll get into, so here in the next segment, but I think that also presents them some run game chances for success, which then allows them to trigger the linebackers more. I think we might, because they're not a heavy blitz team. They're not a heavy run stunt team either, Ryan Lee. They'll like do a guy, but they're not like a heavy attack, bring 7 guys type of defense. I think we might see more of that this week. I do. I think we might see a little bit more of that, because I don't think they think that they can just sit back and run, let Notre Dame kind of come off and get their big linemen going, because BYU has a pretty good sized defensive line, but this is still a massive Notre Dame front. Yes. Right. And they're going to watch what this line did to Cal in the second half. And Cal has a big defensive line. And they're going to look at that and say, Zeke Correll was moving that 330-pound kid off the ball in the second half. You know what I mean? Like, Jared Patterson was pushing, Ray Vahasek around against North Carolina, Zeke Correll and Jared Patterson. And that kid's 310 pounds. So I think what they've seen the last 6 quarters from Notre Dame, I think they know Notre Dame is capable of moving their big boys. So I don't think that they can just play the way that they've been in recent weeks. At least that's something I think Notre Dame needs to be prepared for in this game.
Well, and I also think that you understand that that's how Notre Dame best functions, right? Like, it's not even just the fact of like that they have been doing well on the offensive line. It's also to your point, right? Like, Notre Dame has not been able to create explosive plays in the pass game consistently. So why would I give them the benefit of the doubt if I'm the BYU defensive coordinator and say like, oh, but like I got to protect against the pass? Why? Make them prove that they can do it. If they can't prove it, then you have to negate what Notre Dame does best right now. And in your opinion, like your perspective is the last 6 quarters, Notre Dame has had its bread buttered moving the line of scrimmage and running the football. Those are what everything has kind of been based out of, and utilizing these running backs. So for a Notre Dame offensive line that again goes 317, 308, 308, 319 or something like that, and 327 or whatever, like it's somewhere in those ballparks, right? Across the offensive line. It's a big offensive line for Notre Dame. And what you want to cause havoc for them is to make them have to move off of their track and to readjust their mindset and readjust their movements on the fly. You don't want them to just kind of like inside zone step. You're on your track. You're working up to the second level. You're comboing. Everything is just kind of on schedule, right? When you make a Blake Fisher second guess himself at 327 pounds where he has to readjust on the fly, that's where mistakes happen. So creating havoc up front with movement, I think, to your point, Brian, is 100% right, because they know that Notre Dame wants to get off and they want to get a massive push and they want to establish the run game, because you have not shown in the biggest games, for the most part, against the Oregons. I know people want to point to Oregon all day, right? Oregon just out-physicaled this BYU defense. They did all day. That's the recipe for success in a vacuum. And I think BYU also knows that, like, hey, there's been a team on the schedule, Power 5 team, a good football team, that gave Notre Dame the recipe to beat us, right? So we need to negate what they do well, and that's playing great up front.
I think this is where I think a lot of the misconceptions about BYU exist, because that's the only game a lot of people have seen BYU play. And I would say, imagine what someone's opinion of Notre Dame is if the only game they've seen them play this year was against Marshall. Because Marshall pushed Notre Dame around on defense, right? I mean, does that mean that Marshall's a better team than Notre Dame or a more physical team? Or does that mean Notre Dame played like crap that day? That's not what you typically see from BYU. And like I saw somebody even in the chat said that there's a size disadvantage or a discrepancy between Notre Dame and BYU. No, there's not. BYU starting nose guard is 320 pounds. They're starting 3 technique. He also plays some 5. Lorenzo Fautua is 310 pounds. Their backup nose guard's 305. Their 2 end players, John Nelson's 275. He looks bigger than that, because him and Tyler Beatty are both listed at 275. To me, John Nelson looks at least 10, 15 pounds bigger than Tyler Beatty. Yep. And then Earl 202 Mariner is 288 pounds. He's another defensive end that'll play a bunch in this game. And so this is a big front. I think the thing that they're going to realize is this is one of those games, to your point, Ryan, where they don't have the size advantage with their front. And what they've been able to do when they have had success at running the ball is those big guys occupy blockers. Cal tried that. Cal's a very similar team. Now, they're very different schematically, but they're similar philosophically when it comes to their run defense, Ryan. And what I mean by that is use your big boys up front to eat up blocks and let your smart, instinctive linebackers run free. That's what Cal likes to do. And Notre Dame didn't let him do that in the second half, and that's why Notre Dame ran the ball effectively. BYU is going to realize, okay, I don't think we can – maybe they tried early, but they're going to have something to counter that. And now, if Notre Dame can't push those guys off the ball, then they're going to struggle to run the ball effectively, because then that allows the linebackers to read and react as opposed to being forced to stunt. If they can get those guys, if they can force Cal to trigger their linebackers more, which then results in somebody's got to replace them, right? Which means more safeties triggering down in the box, more single high coverage, then that exposes them and other stuff on the perimeter. So the whole game plan, run, pass, all of it, screen, all of it is going to be dependent upon Notre Dame winning this matchup. They can and they should, but again, this is what we've talked about all week, Ryan. Yes, they should, but we cannot forget that less than a month ago, this is the same team that couldn't run on Ohio State. This is the same team that couldn't run on Marshall, right? So they've got to prove. Notre Dame is still in show-me mode. Beating up on North Carolina doesn't erase the first 10 quarters of the season. You know what I mean? And that's where I need to see it. Can they do it? Yes. Is it going to be easy? No. And that's what I think this matchup is. But I still think on paper and in practicality, Notre Dame has the advantage over BYU. They just have to exert it. And that's what's going to make this really interesting. Because the thing is now, teams now have a bit more data on who Notre Dame is without Tyler Buchner from a running standpoint.
Yep.
Okay, so, hey, this is what they did. We saw what they did against Cal. We saw the adjustments that they did against North Carolina. They're running less duo. They're running more inside zone stretch. I even kind of think that they saw a little bit of mid zone in against North Carolina too. And so they're now adjusting. So Notre Dame has to be prepared for that. And so this is why we say this is a big game for Notre Dame. Because if Notre Dame can run the ball effectively on BYU, Ryan, that tells me that they have in fact turned the corner, and it's not about beating up on a bad North Carolina defense anymore. That's why I think this is an important part of this matchup.
And I think you'll have a big indication on it early, if I'm being honest. Like, there's some games where, like, it's slow to get going, and then you just kind of chip away. Like, I think Notre Dame, if they're going to be successful running the football, you're going to know it in the first couple series. Like, I think that they are going to try to establish it early because, again, we're going to take a look at the BYU pass defense. It's a completely different story than when the run defense is at right now, right? So Notre Dame knows that in theory, with how they've been playing the last game and a half, that they do have the advantage going into this one. But at the end of the day, to your point, it's show me season. It's show me season right now, man. But I think that the first couple drives, you will know very early. Yeah. Is Notre Dame going to have a nice day running the football, or is it going to be a little bit of a struggle? I think we'll have that indication pretty early on.
I want to see how the line comes off the ball. We the first drive against North Carolina, Notre Dame threw on 2 of their first 3 plays. So it was like, okay, you don't really know what's going on. 3 and out. Okay, what's happening here? The next drive, they didn't even score on the next drive, I don't think. Didn't they go for it on 4th down and not get it? I'm trying to remember how that game it was a little bit of a weird weekend for me. But you could even see that next drive, even early. It's like one of those things where sometimes there's games where even though it's close early, you kind of feel like it's not. Yeah, they missed a field goal on their second drive. And I remember kind of sitting back watching like when Alabama played Michigan State in the playoff in 2015. It was like 10-0 at halftime. Yep. But you're like, this is not a 10-point game. Like they have so thoroughly outplayed them. Like the first year that Ohio State and Michigan played, I think wasn't like 13-10 at halftime. And you're like, this is not a close game. And then second half, it ended up being like 42-13 or something like that. And you just watch, you're like, the score is not indicative of how this game is playing out. And I kind of felt like after the first drive of each game, of each team, so UNC had their first drive and Notre Dame had their first drive. After that, you immediately saw that Notre Dame was going to impose their will on North Carolina on both sides of the ball. It was just about, okay, can they execute, right? We hadn't seen that in previous games. And it wasn't even just the competition stinks. And this is why we talked about this after the game. It was, you could see it in the footwork. You could see it in the hand play. You could see them hitting Carolina and then driving their feet after contact. That's not relevant to are they good or the other team good or not. That's a you thing. And that's why I say it's more about Notre Dame. And so will we see that? Those are the things that we are going to kind of see in this game, Ryan, is we're going, and to your point, we're going to know early, is Notre Dame coming off the ball with force? Are they coming off the ball and driving their feet? Are they working those combos well? Are they getting a push to the second level? Even if they're, 3 runs, because that first drive, they were like 3 runs, 2 runs, but you're like, you know what? They're about to pop a couple because you could just see them getting that push. And I think that's where I think, Ryan, you're spot on about how this is going to go. It wasn't until the third drive that Notre Dame really started to kind of get going. And it really wasn't until the third drive after the Drew Pine scramble that they started to get going. But you just knew the foundation was being laid. And that's what I think is what we're going to see early. Now, it may not pay off right away. Maybe they don't go right up and down the field the first 2 drives and put touchdowns on the board. I hope they do. But I think you will see right away if that's the case. And that's why this is again, we're going to spend a little bit more time on this matchup than all the others because I think this one is the biggest key to this game and could be the biggest key to the run. Because, again, this isn't just about BYU. This is if you do what you're capable of on BYU, then, okay, watch out, Stanford. Watch out, UNLV. Watch out, Syracuse, because this team's about to get rolling. And that's why this is important.
And the first couple games too, Brian, like the offensive line struggled. Like we documented that, right? It's been obviously better. And for the first time this season, they put it pretty much on a full game scope against North Carolina, where you're like, okay, they took a big step. They played good football. But I think there's still two outcomes that could happen here, if I'm being honest, right? One outcome is that Notre Dame is like, oh, wow, we did it. Like now we can get rolling or a little bit. And that could go two ways. One way is we're feeling ourselves a little bit too much and we're not preparing ourselves adequately to play against a better team. And then the other way is that now our confidence is exuding, it's through the roof, and now we are going to dominate moving forward, right? So I am interested to see what the Notre Dame offensive line looks early on in this game. I want to see if they have the same tenacity and demeanor to themselves, or if they think they've, I don't want to say arrived, because they only won one football game in a somewhat impressive fashion, but I think that there can be a false sense of like, wow, that was pretty easy, if we're being honest, right? So I'm really interested to see just how much of not an emphasis, but how this Notre Dame offensive line comes in and how they play early on, because I'm hoping that you see the aggressiveness, the physicality. If you do, I think Notre Dame is going to be in a good spot at the end of this football game. But again, that is something that we need to see on the field before we feel good about it.
Let's move on to the pass game matchup. This is going to be the pass game, Notre Dame pass game against the BYU pass defense. Now, these numbers are very interesting because on paper, this is a huge advantage to BYU on paper. And rightfully so. They've been a good pass defense this season. They were a little up and down last year. At times, I thought their pass defense was good. At times, they got beat up a little bit. But when they're good, they're good. And the thing that surprises me is they've been good as a pass defense for most of the last two seasons. At times, really good. At times, okay, without being a very good pass rushing team. They have 9 sacks in 5 games. That's not good. As you see, it ranks 83rd. They only had 20 last year, Ryan. They had 20 sacks all of last season. And so you look at it and you're like, how are they good? Well, one thing is they get up early on teams, and then they can just kind of sit back and keep everything in front of them. They're a pretty disciplined, well-coached secondary. They compete. I think they've got good size in the secondary. I think that's important. I mean, you look at their starters, they're 6'1", 6'1", 6'1", 6 foot. Their backup corners are 6'2" and 5'11". Their nickel's a 5'11" kid. They're long, they're rangy. They're not super athletic, but they're better athletes than I think a lot of Notre Dame fans appreciate, and so I think this is an underrated part of their team. And they're good kind of across the board, right? I mean, they're good with yards per attempt, yards per completion, yards per game. They're good at part of it also is the other side of that is part of the reason that their pass defense has been decent this year is because they really haven't played anybody that's any good at throwing the football. I mean, that's the other part of it. I mean, in context in this matchup is really, really interesting. And so when you look at BYU and you look at who they've played, South Florida ranks 113th in the nation passing offense. Wyoming ranks 121st in the nation in pass offense. Utah State ranks 104th in the nation in pass offense. And then Baylor is the second best passing team they've played this year, and they rank 67th in the nation at passing offense. The best pass offense they've faced all year is Oregon. And Oregon, Bo Nix went 14 of 20. Actually, I don't even know if that was Bo Nix because I think they might have actually had to back up in late in the game. But Oregon went 14 of 20 against BYU. Yeah, Bo Nix went 13 of 18, which is 72.2% completion percentage for 222 yards and averaged 12.3 yards per attempt.
Wow, they made Bo Nix look good. They must be bad.
Dude, stop. I don't know if you've paid attention since the Georgia game, but Bo's been pretty good. But as a team, they went 14 of 20, which is 70% completions, 227 yards. Their backup came in and threw a pick. And even with the backup not playing well, they averaged 11.4 yards per attempt. So they've played one pass offense with a pulse this year, and they didn't have a lot of success against it. Now, Oregon's pass offense has been a lot better than Notre Dame so far. Oregon ranks 41st because let's be real, folks. You look at Notre Dame yards per game, they're closer to Utah State and Wyoming than they are Oregon and Baylor. Okay, so so that's the thing is like say, well, they've played bad teams. Well, has Notre Dame given us evidence that they're not a bad pass offense, right? And that's the other intriguing aspect of this matchup because on paper, Ryan, this isn't close. This is a huge BYU advantage.
Yes,
but again, why?
Context.
But again, context matters for both teams. And number two, this goes into what version of Notre Dame are we going to see? Are we going to see the North Carolina version with maybe a little bit improved play from the wide receivers, hopefully different receivers in the field? Or are we going to see the pass offense we saw the first 3 weeks, which is dink and dunk? And that's going to be an interesting part of this because BYU does a pretty good job of protecting against the deep ball, but there are opportunities if you can scheme them up right to get some big plays. And I think they're vulnerable to some of the stuff that we saw North Carolina vulnerable to with some of the back stuff and the misdirection stuff because they are, once they diagnose, they are pretty aggressive getting downhill. Mm-hmm. And I think that opens up some opportunities. So this is such an intriguing aspect to match up, Ryan.
Especially, I mean, there's a lot more opportunities, especially if the run game comes to play, right? If the offensive line's firing off early on, there's going to be, I mean, the safety's going to have to creep up a little bit. You're going to have to take some chances in one-on-one. I'll say this though, Brian, I was really impressed by the BYU secondary because I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. Because, like, again, I didn't look at the numbers before I started, and I didn't know any of the starting secondary players. Like, I knew Tyler Beatty, I knew Peyton Wolgar, I knew some of the linebackers. Mm-hmm. I didn't know any of the defensive backs, if I'm being completely honest. And I'll say this, Caleb Hayes was probably the biggest surprise I had when watching film, the Oregon State transfer at corner.
Yeah.
I thought he is 6 foot, 195 pounds, pretty good size, but he's a really sticky, good cover man. Like, he's pesky is how I would refer to him, right? And I think you kind of get that in the whole level of the secondary. Like, they're just really solid football players, man. Like, I don't think that there's anybody that stands out that you're like, wow, that guy is a next level dude. That's an All-American, like all that type of stuff. But they're good, really good college secondary, in my opinion. Like, I think that they play good for what they are. So Caleb Hayes is a good football player. The rest of the secondary is dependable. Don't give up a ton of explosive plays, play with good discipline on the back end. So this is one where Notre Dame's has to be able to take advantage of the opportunities they do have because you're not going to get this team out of position secondary-wise a ton, in my opinion. But when you do, you have to capitalize on the opportunities because, to your point, Brian, at the end of the day, Notre Dame's wide receivers and pass catchers are more athletic than what BYU has on the back end. It's just BYU is playing more technically sound football.
That was also true against Marshall and Cal. And right now, here's the interesting thing. Do you know how many plays Caleb Hayes played against Oregon?
I don't.
The answer is 8.
Wow.
Because he got hurt in that game. Mm-hmm. And then he didn't play against Wyoming the next week. So it's not a coincidence that the one game where BYU gave up a lot of success in the pass game, won a lot of yards. It was only 227, but they didn't throw a lot in the second half because they had a big lead. But their best cover player only played 8 snaps and then didn't play the next week. So again, you look at it and say, put it like this, if Notre Dame played a game without their best player and didn't have success in that game at the position he plays, but then we're really good every other game that he's played in, you'd say, hey, man, that's not really who we are. We didn't have a good game because our best guy didn't play. Well, that's exactly what we're going to see against BYU. And so to me, this ties into the previous breakdown. If Notre Dame doesn't have success running the ball, and this game becomes about the Notre Dame receivers and Drew Pine ripping up the BYU defense, that could be a problem because it is a smart, very experienced, savvy group of players that are long and physical in coverage, but not physical to the point where they get grabby. You need the run game to have success. You need to get the safeties thinking about more than just covering Michael Mayer and the receivers, and then get yourself in some one-on-ones. I think that's where Notre Dame can scheme up some success. And then at the end of the day, the receivers have to play better. Simple as that. As a group, they have to play better. Yep. And if they don't, then they're going to have some problems. Now, Tom Maurice can help that by putting certain guys on the field and using other guys. Like, this is this needs to be a great tendency breaker game for Notre Dame in the pass game. Because they're going to look at you and they're going to say, okay, 87 you're going to throw to, but 9 and 85 have 0 targets all year. So if 87's in the game with other tight ends, we don't need to worry about those guys because they're not factors, right? When we see 29 in the game, he's not really a factor. You know, there's certain aspects where when Notre Dame has certain personnel on the field, you know that guy ain't getting the ball in the pass game. This needs to be a game where you go 13 personnel and throw a couple times in a row. out of different looks and say, hey, you can't zero in on us. It needs to be a game where you put 15 on the field and they're not going to be prepared for him, and you get him a couple shots down the field to loosen them up. Those are all things that good coaches do coming out of the break. That's why self-scouting is important. Hey, look, guys, we have literally not thrown a ball to our number 2 and number 3 tight ends that are in the game right now. And we've only thrown 3 balls to our number 2 tight ends all season. That can be something to our advantage. You can look at it and say, hey, we're not doing it right. Or you can say, hey, this is something we can use to our advantage, especially with like a guy like Eli Raridan, who has been a really good blocker so far for Notre Dame, by far their best blocking tight end. So that's where a play action shot could be a big play, some kind of, movement action where he's off on the backside or front side and he's blocking the edge and he sneaks to the backside. Remember that play that they did against Stanford in 2018 at the end of the game, where that Alizé kind of blocked and Ian kind of rolled out. Alizé blocked and then snuck backside and Ian just threw it back, caught it, ran to the end zone.
Yeah, it's just a little tight end leak, man. That's all it
something
is.
like that.
It's great.
Right.
Yeah.
We know Notre Dame has that in their repertoire. That's the point. Tommy was on that staff. So I think there are some things that you can do in this game that are great tendency breakers that you can take advantage of and steal some yards early. And I think if you can have a big because I say this, Ryan, this as a defensive guy. You play defense. You were a defensive coach. Yep. When a team comes out and rips you with a tendency breaker, that puts you on your heels big time. Because now you're on the sideline scrambling, like what the heck just happened? You know what I mean? Yep. And now you're not thinking about we're coming back the next series and we're going back to our bread and butter and we're doing this. I think that's going to be a really important piece of this. But as I said at the end of the day, Drew Pine's got to be every bit as decisive and accurate as he was against North Carolina, and the receivers have to play better because all those things can steal you some yards. But at the end of the day, you can't steal yards 12 times, 13, 15 times. You can steal yards for 2 or 3 big plays, like we saw against Carolina. The leak from Logan Diggs, the throwback bootleg pass to Logan Diggs. You can do that. You saw it against Cal with Estime and Tyree. You can't do that 15 times.
Yeah.
Those will get you a couple big plays, which for Notre Dame set up points, but they still only scored 24 points against Cal. Right? And so it comes to using that to then bolster opportunities for Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey, hopefully Tobias Merriweather. Those things are going to have to be a big part of this, Ryan, because I promise you one thing. With BYU's length and athleticism, you had 2 guys listed in your breakdown today that are kind of like safety or former safety type of guys or long and rangy type of guys that can run with Michael Mayer more than what we've seen so far this year. Not saying they can run with him like, he still has an advantage, but they're long and athletic and veteran enough where they can say, hey, we're going to have some things for 87. Somebody else is going to have to beat us.
Yep.
And that's an interesting aspect of this, Ryan, that's going to make this a very hey, Tommy, you got a chance to do some fun stuff this week. Let's see you do it, is where I'm at.
There's two things I'm looking forward to seeing. One is, to your point, I talked about Caleb Hayes already, right? From a fundamental perspective, I think the cornerback position is more proven for BYU, or the secondary is just more proven than what Notre Dame has at wide receiver right now, right? There's talent advantage is clearly, in my opinion, in Notre Dame's favor. But at the end of the day, Brian, Caleb, you're going to have a one-on-one matchup with Caleb Hayes at points, right? And you're going to have to win those battles, man, because right now on paper, I'm just kind of like, Caleb Hayes probably has the advantage on whoever he's playing right now. Like on paper, that's what the film tells me. But Notre Dame has more talent. They just need to actually make a play, at the end of the day. Sure. And then to your second point there, which is where I wanted to kind of start it out with, the tight end position for Notre Dame is very interesting in this football game. Because like you said, BYU has some longer athletic kids on the second and third level, like Tooley that we talked about. Peyton Wilgar will do some stuff in space. Bywater can run a little bit at inside. He plays a little more inside, but he can still cover the seam up a little bit. I think that they'll have a plan for Mayer. But if you're in a multiple tight end sets, let's say that they're with Mayer and Raridan on the field, for instance, or Mayer and Stays, it doesn't really matter. What is the matchup that you're going to go to against the second tight end for Notre Dame?
Right.
And I know, like you said, Notre Dame has not targeted either one of those players at this point, but I felt like for the last couple of weeks, it's coming with Raridan. It has to be coming soon, in my opinion, right? So
you think
you would hope. I mean, so if your best athletes on second level are going to occupy Michael Mayer to the safety level, what is the plan with the second tight ends? I don't know what the plan is with that for them. I think they have to make a decision if Notre Dame shows the ability to work the second tight end in these 12 personnel sets. I don't know if that'll be a point of emphasis. It's just something that personally I'm interested to see because I don't know what the counter is if Notre Dame shows the ability to work both tight ends in the passing game off of multiple set. I'm just curious to see how that wrinkle works into this football game.
Because if you look at their numbers, and again, we've said the one area where I think Pro Football Focus provides a little bit of positivity and help is their tracking numbers. Their safeties rarely get targeted in the pass game. Why? Because they don't cover a lot. They either play over the top or they're playing in the box, right? So you've got to find ways, Ryan, to your point, what will be their answer? Who's going to be king on the number 2 tight end? It's going to be the alley players who are reading for run diagnosis. Who's that? It's the safeties. That's the one matchup that I love in this game for Notre Dame. I think Amon Hanneman is a solid football player. I think Malik Moore is a solid football player. Hayden Livingston plays a lot of football. They use 3 different safeties a decent amount. Micah Harper plays. Most guys don't get targeted very often. Why? Because again, they're not used that way a lot. If you can find ways to get a Raritan or a Holden Stace, or even a Braden Lindsay or Lorenzo Styles in the slot, find ways to get matched up against their safeties. That's where you can get some big plays, and that's where I think that number 2 tight end matchup is going to be important because they're going to have a Michael Mayer plan and they're going to have a running back plan. Notre Dame has averaged 88 receiving yards a game the last 2 weeks with their running backs. They've had over a 30-yard gain in the pass game with their running backs in each of the last 2 games, and they would have had another long gain if it wasn't for the end zone stopping Chris Tyree after 21 yards, right? I mean, he was going to – if you were running that play from your own 20, it's an 80-yard touchdown. I mean, that's how open Chris Tyree was. So you've seen that now 3 times in both of Notre Dame's wins. Who are they going to be using to stop that, Ryan? Based on what we've seen, I would assume that it's going to be the linebackers. So you're going to have the linebackers really occupy with Michael Mayer and your running backs.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think Notre Dame, if they're willing to be creative and use personnel, we see good teams do this all the time. Hey, we know where we're good, and we know that they know where we're good. So here's what they're going to do to defend that, and we've got some answers for it going into the game. And that's where I think you can get some really interesting matchups with your number 2 tight ends. Because do you really think BYU is like, hey, guys, let's make sure we're ready to stop Eli Raritan and Holden Stace this week?
with the whole 0 combined targets.
The whole 0 combined targets, exactly. No, they don't. And so that's where I think Tommy has to be able to have some opportunities to make some big plays. We'll see if he does it or not. I don't know. I have my doubts, but I'm still, cautiously optimistic that we see Coach Reese really get things turned around this week and start to be the guy that I know he's capable of being. But, again, we're in show me mode, man. We're in show me mode.
That's it.
So this matchup's interesting, Ryan. I think this one down here, the sack matchup right here is also interesting because Notre Dame, the sacks they've given up, they gave up a decent amount in the first 2 weeks. They gave up a lot of pressures the first 2 weeks. Last 2 weeks, they've been pretty good at protecting the quarterback. What I don't know is that because Cal and North Carolina aren't good at protecting, at pass rushing, which they're not. Well, neither's BYU. I think that's a part too, is you've got to be willing to give Drew Pine time. If Drew Pine can get into a rhythm and have time, then I think he'll have a lot of success. This is a matchup that I think Drew can thrive, and we've seen it happen. I mean, they've been pretty good this year against the pass defense, but, we saw Arizona go for 345 against them last year. We saw Arizona State go for 265, completing over 70% of their throws. They just turned the ball over too much. We saw Utah State throw for a bunch on them last year. We saw for Virginia rip them up last year in the pass game. We've seen them be vulnerable at times to throwing the football, but what they're very good at is they're very good at forcing turnovers in the pass game, and they're very good at being disruptive with the different schemes. So it's kind of like they're either really good against the pass or they get ripped up. And a lot of it has to do with the game plans and the ability to find the matchups that work for you. What's also interesting, Ryan, is if you look at the last couple of years, their linebackers have picked off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Their linebackers have picked off 9 passes in the last 2 years. last year and this year. They've got 4 interceptions off the year. All 4 of them were made by Max Tooley and Ben Bywater.
I know, I saw that. Yep.
Yeah, and then last year they had 5 interceptions, so they had 15 interceptions last year. They had more interceptions than they gave up touchdowns. They had 14 touchdowns allowed, 15 interceptions. You had Peyton Wilgar had 2. Chaz Ayu had 1. Remember him? Drew Jensen had 1, and Max Tooley had 1. And they even had a D lineman with an interception last year. So they're front guys, and a lot of that is because they'll get tipped balls because they've got really long D linemen who are holding up space, and so they're read the quarterback's eyes, get your hands up. That's a concern with a 6-foot quarterback, right? The other one is their linebackers do a really good job of getting up underneath routes and you think like at the snap, you think, hey, I'm throwing this curl route here because of how this team's lined up. And then those linebackers just fly out underneath that thing and pick that sucker off. Or they'll tip balls, that they'll pick off. So that's going to be an interesting part of this too. You've got to protect the football. Drew Pine did a great job of that the last 2 games. Outside of one play, right? The fumbled snap. You've got to continue that against BYU. No question about it.
The sack talk's going to be interesting, Brian, because like you pointed out, BYU is not great at getting after the quarterback. And for just a 1-versus-1 comparison here, when a team is struggling at something, this isn't the week that you want it to become a strength, right? Like you want to be able to just let them continue to not be an effective pass rushing team. And I think when you look at this lineup that they have, they don't really have a one-on-one pass rusher that gives me worry that like, hey, Notre Dame, has a disadvantage at that spot, right? Like, we mentioned Tyler Beatty, who I think is a good football player. I know he was limited last week, obviously, but he's not a one-on-one pass rush kind of guy. No. He's a physical 5 technique, like 4-4-I. Like he's going to do that dirty work type of stuff, right? Like that's what his role in this defense is. I don't think they really have a guy that I say, one-on-one, he's an issue, right? Like there's no Isaiah Foskey on this football team. There's nobody even close to that regard. So Notre Dame offensive line-wise, we talked about the big emphasis on the running game. We also need in the pass game this needs to be a clean pocket for Drew Pine all day. Because if it can be, I think they're going to have opportunities. And right now, BYU has not shown you through the first handful of games that they are effective getting after the quarterback. And if they are not, then they have to start worrying about like, hey, do we bring some second-level pressures? Do we mix and match stuff? Are we going to blitz Peyton Wilgar, put him on the line of scrimmage more? Then you kind of get out of your comfort zone a little bit. So interested to see if Notre Dame can continue to make the pass rush, which has not been a strength to BYU, and I don't want to call it a weakness, but not a strong point for him.
But that's why, to me, Ryan, the run game is so important. And to me, when you look at the run game, what BYU does that gives them a lot of success is they drop a lot of dudes in coverage. They don't care about rushing the quarterback. Schematically, it's just not an important thing for them. You saw it last year, you saw it this year. They're just not a team that really puts a lot of emphasis on trying to find ways to get after the quarterback. As I said, last year in 13 games, they only had 20 sacks. 4 of them came, 8 of them came in the first 3 games.
Yep.
And, against Arizona, had 4 against Arizona, 2 against Utah, 2 against Arizona State. And then they had 3 in the bowl game against UAB. And they didn't do a whole lot beforehand. The year before, they only had 26 sacks. And the funny thing is, who they had the most sacks against that year? Navy. And 5 against Navy.
That's bizarre.
Right? And the year before that, in 2019, they had 17 sacks. 5 of them came in the bowl in a bowl game against Hawaii. The year before that, 27 sacks. 9 of them came in 2 games against New Mexico State and UMass. Get the point? This is just a team that doesn't really put a lot of emphasis on rushing the quarterback. Now, they drop a coverage a lot. They'll drop 8. But the big key is if you can run on them and get yourself in 2nd and short, 3rd and short, like 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3s, where they have to respect your run, that's where you can create some of those big play opportunities. But if you're finding yourself in 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, especially with a quarterback who's not a guy that's going to really scare you with his legs, then they'll just drop 7, drop 8, and have their big 6'5" defensive linemen get their hands up and not give Notre Dame's 6-foot quarterback lanes to throw through.
Yep.
So I think those are the issues, and that's why the run game is going to be a very important piece to this part of the pass game. Because if you can keep them, it's like this. The first down success in the run game has to be important. But I would also argue that if the run game first down success is there, then that's going to open up opportunities for success in the pass game on first down. because the play action game, the screen game, the RPO game is really where a lot of Notre Dame's success is going to come from in the pass game. If you're not going to have a ton of success just dropping back and ripping BYU up, I don't think. It's going to come off play action. It's going to come off RPOs, and it's going to come out of the screen game. I think that's where you have to have your success. That only works. All that stuff only works if you're running the football. Mm-hmm. And that's why that's so important for Notre Dame. And then last key, Ryan, let's just kind of briefly work through this one. This is the Notre Dame scoring offense against the BYU scoring defense. It's funny, BYU's 73rd in points, but they're 38th in yards and 29th in yards per play. Right? Yeah. They make you work for those points. They don't turn it over much on offense. They've had some special teams things that have kind of set up some points for them. This is an odd number for me. They've also had some points that teams have scored late in games. You know, I mean, you look at South Florida, you know, there's other games where the score was closer than the game actually was. I think Wyoming was a little bit that way. But, you know, they're a quality defense, not great, and these numbers reflect that. You can score on them. You can move the ball on them. You red zone, they're not that great. Third down, they're not that great. Notre Dame's been a great red zone team this year. They just can't move the ball, right? That's been their problem, right? If Notre Dame gets into the side of the 20, they're going to score. And with the exception of the first drive against Ohio State, they're mostly scoring touchdowns because I believe the second stop there, the non-red zone score, was taking a knee. Mm-hmm. Correct? So you know, so we've seen that. So you look at it and say, you know, this is a situation where Notre Dame, if they get in the red zone, they score. Yep. That should continue against BYU. Now, the question is, can they get into the red zone? And I think that third down success is going to be the key. Notre Dame was terrible on third down the first 3 games. They were very good on third down in the fourth game. What was different about the fourth game than the other 3? They actually scored a lot of points. It's that simple. Now, all the stuff we talked about before, execution on first and second down, all that kind of stuff factors into this. But Notre Dame is not right now is not playing like a really explosive team that just doesn't get into third downs. They get into a lot of third downs, and they've got to move the chains on them. And that was important in the Carolina game. It's got to be important in this game. If they can do that, they should have a lot of success and be able to score on BYU. If they're struggling on third down, and BYU can be a tough third down team at times, if you get behind the sticks, that's a key for them. Is they want to create incompletions on early downs, get some run stops on for early first and second down, put you in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, where they can drop into coverage. Yep. That's going to be a big key. So you've got to be good on your early downs to beat them.
No, Brian, I mean, for me, BYU's defense, they win off of length, right? So we talked about the defensive line having a lot of length. We also mentioned briefly the second level has a lot of length, right? So they're going to disrupt some passing lanes kind of with that natural length they have. And to your point, and I agree 1,000,000,000%, if there was a higher percentage that I could go, I get the infinity symbol out, I guess, that Notre Dame needs to win on first downs. And that's been pretty consistent every game, you know, like that's not like a groundbreaking thing. Notre Dame needs to win, stay in front of the chain.
And it's not true for every team. If you're an explosive team, you're always a threat to score. Notre Dame hasn't shown themselves to be an explosive team yet this year. Yep. That's what makes it so important, right? To your point. Because some people say, well, it's always important. Not really. If you've got huge, I mean, Ohio State doesn't get in a lot of third downs, but if they are, they still can score a lot of points because they're a 70-yard touchdown waiting to happen in a lot of instances, right? Oregon was that way back in the day, right? There are teams that can just, hey, yeah, we get behind the sticks, but we're so explosive it doesn't matter because we're up off 70-yard gain. Notre Dame hasn't shown themselves to be. That's how Notre Dame was not a real efficient, great first down team in 2017 or 2015, but it didn't matter because they were a threat to score from 70 every time the ball was snapped.
Yep.
Right. This team doesn't have that yet, and so that's why I want to make that point because I know how some people are going to respond to it. We got to always be good on first down, not necessarily.
Yeah. Sure. Necessarily. No, it's great context to have. So I would also say that the 2 points that you pointed out here that I wanted to harp on a little bit was Notre Dame's third down percentage. Like you said, it's trending in the right direction because of last week, but it's been a spot where Notre Dame has struggled on third downs. And why is that? Because if they're not running the ball well on first down or creating, I don't want to say explosive plays because you just need good gains on first down. If you're not staying in front of the chains, you're going to make it a harder job for you to have a operable opportunity on third down in a advantageous situation. And BYU, for the most part, I know they only rank 55th, but they've been a pretty good third down team, to your point, right? So I think that's one thing that where with how Notre Dame functions, running the ball, short to intermediate passing game, hopefully creating some explosive plays. I think you need to stay in those third and shorts, third and mediums, because I think that's the place that you're going to win in this football game. You're going to have an opportunity to create some explosive plays, but more than anything, Notre Dame needs to have sustainable drives, consistency, stay in front of the sticks. I think that's how you beat BYU.
Well, the thing is, Ryan, we're still early enough in the year, to your point, and I love that you went to the context argument, because to your point, 4 or 5 games into the year, one bad game can throw off your whole statistics. And that's what happened with BYU against Baylor. They gave up 50% conversion rate, 9 of 18. 9 of 18. And their other 4 games, South Florida was 3 of 12. That's 25%. Oregon was 4 of 12. Wyoming was 3-11, and Utah State was 6 of 18. That's what killed Utah State. They could not convert third downs. And they didn't do very good on fourth downs either in that game. Utah State went 1 of 2. Teams have been willing to go for it on fourth down. They've had 13 fourth down opportunities, and teams have converted 7 of them, right? And so, but a big part is because with the exception of the Baylor game, they have been pretty good on third down. I mean, that one bad game. Now, the reason Oregon was still able to score points is because Oregon had big plays. Oregon used big plays, and that was the difference. Notre Dame needs to get to that point. I think that they can get to that point. You and I have talked about this, but the reality is they aren't at that point in time right now. Nope. And hopefully this is the game that changes that. But so far, that's just not who they are. And again, the BYU game, the BYU Oregon game was a different deal. They had a 4-play, 64-yard drive to start that game against them. They had Oregon had an 8-play, 75-yard drive. Again, had a big play wrapped into that. And then they had a couple short fields. They had a 35-yard touchdown drive in that game as well. They were up 38-7 at one point in time. But they were able to use some big plays to have success against Oregon. So, against BYU. They had a 50-yard gain to Troy Franklin. They had a 36-yard run from Irving. Chase Cota had a 20-plus yard gain. Matavio he's a tight end, right? Had an over 20-yard gain. Chris Hudson had over a 20-yard gain in the pass game. So they were able to use big plays to set up their scores. Oregon didn't consistently move the ball up and down the field on them just by converting a million third downs. They were able to get some big plays that got them into touchdown range and they were able to score points. So Notre Dame hasn't shown that they can be that offense yet. They're going to have to be able to do that against BYU. And if they run the ball well, I expect them to be good on third down.
Yep.
I do. And I expect them to have fewer third downs, to be honest with you. If they're good on first down running the ball and throwing the ball, if Notre Dame can dominate first down, they will dominate this game. I truly believe that. I do. Mm-hmm. I do. Because BYU is not a great 3rd and 3 team against a team like this, because of the type of matchups that Notre Dame can do. So let's go to defense, Ryan. This is one of the most misleading statistical matchups I've ever done doing this.
I know where you're going. I know where you're going here. Yeah.
Well, let me see it. Let me hear you say it, because I want to.
BYU's running game is not very good.
I'm talking. No. What I'm saying is the BYU offense against the Notre Dame defense is an advantage BYU in most categories. Mm-hmm. Big picture, it's very misleading, and I want to kind of kick it off first. Why? Number one, we've talked about who BYU has played. They haven't played very good defenses. Oregon's not a really good defense either. Oregon gave up 49 points to Georgia. They gave up 41 points to Washington State. Needed a crazy fourth quarter comeback to come back and win that game. Oregon's a good football team. They're not Oregon of 2011 or 2014, right? Or 2010, I should say. 2010 and 2014. Notre Dame, on the other hand, defensively, doesn't have impressive numbers. I'm going to go through all of these real quick. 68th in rushing yards allowed, 53rd in passing yards allowed, 62nd in points per game. A little misleading because of the pick six. 53rd in points per game, or yards per game, 58th in yards per play. They've played much better than that. And here's the interesting part. BYU has played South Florida. It's not really good on offense. They've played Wyoming, not really good on offense. And I'm going to kind of give you some context here. We already talked about how those teams are in passing offense. But you look at South Florida, they rank 101st in scoring offense. You look at Wyoming, they rank 105th in scoring offense. Utah State ranks 120th in scoring offense. And Baylor right now ranks 28th in scoring offense. And let's be honest about that. Baylor ranks that high because they hung 69 points up on Albany and 42 on Texas State. They scored 20 in a loss to BYU, 31 in a win over Iowa State, and 25 in a win over Oklahoma State. They're not a great offensive football team. And so they haven't played a lot of good offenses. And then Notre Dame, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. And I had this in my stacking up article for the Notre Dame defense, Ryan, is if you really look at the numbers and you consider the competition they've played so far, it actually puts the Notre Dame defense in pretty good light. Notre Dame has already played two teams that rank in the top 10 in scoring, offense, total offense, and yards per play. That's Ohio State and North Carolina. They've also faced two top 15 rushing teams, and they've played two top 20 passing teams. And so, like, the competition has been really good. Notre Dame held Ohio State to – I'm trying to find this number here real quick that I had. And did I put it in this article or did I have it in a different one? Give me – oh, here it's down here in the scoring offense. So Ohio State has averaged 55.8 points per game this year against teams not named Notre Dame. Notre Dame held them to 21. North Carolina has scored 48.8 points per game this year against teams not named Notre Dame. Notre Dame held them to 32, and as we all know, it was 38-14 at one point in time. And they scored some garbage touchdowns late. So the quality of the competition is such that Notre Dame has held all four of the teams they've played below their rushing average. And except for Marshall, well below their season rushing average. They've held them all below their offensive average and points average. And so yet they still don't rank really high because they've played some pretty potent offenses this season. But BYU is also a very potent offense, in my opinion. They can be. Now, BYU, on the other hand, I think is a dangerous offense. And the other thing that makes this misleading, Ryan, is they're only averaging 23 points per game against the two Power 5 teams they've played this year. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yep.
But here's my caveat. Do you know how many snaps Puka Nacua played in those two games? 0. Because he was hurt.
Yep.
He didn't play against Utah State last week. He is by far their best receiver. He's a legit football player. He'd be starting at Washington right now if he didn't leave. He was playing at Washington. He wasn't like – he didn't leave Washington, I don't believe, because of playing time. He left Washington because that place was a mess. Like, put it like this. If Kalen DeBoer was the head coach at Washington when Puka signed, he's still at Washington. Probably. And he's one of the best receivers in the Pac-12, in my opinion. He's really good, and they haven't had him. I mean, you're talking about a kid, Ryan, last year that averaged over 20 yards a catch. You know, this year so far, Puka's got 4 catches for 48 yards, and Gunnar Romney has missed the first 4 games. He didn't play until Utah State. That's their two best receivers. They didn't play against Baylor, and they didn't play against Oregon. That matters, right? It's hard to score on good football teams, especially good defensive teams like Baylor, if you're not having your best receivers. You know, last year, who was the number 1 and 2 receivers for BYU last year? Who was 1 and who was 2? Puka was 1, Gunnar was 2. Puka had 43 catches for 805 yards, 18.7 to catch. Gunnar Romney was the number 2 pass catcher in yards with 34 catches and 594 yards. And he did that in only 10 games. And he was 17.5 a catch. So you didn't have those guys against Baylor and BYU. Or Baylor and I keep saying BYU. Baylor and Oregon. They will have them both against Notre Dame. So there's a lot of different context that almost makes it kind of hard to, or even like, I don't even want to go through these stats a whole lot because there's so much context that makes it look like you really can't gauge how good either team is. BYU's numbers are better when Puka plays. Simple as that, right? Notre Dame's numbers are better than they show because they've played some really good offenses. They've held well below their season averages, which makes this a really interesting matchup, Ryan, that I think context needs to be had on both sides. BYU fans need to understand, don't look at the Notre Dame numbers and think that's who they are because they've played offenses better than yours. And Notre Dame fans need to look at BYU and say, I watched them against Oregon. They don't have really any playmakers. Well, yeah, because their 2 best playmakers were standing on the sidelines injured, right? And so that fact that matters to me. And so that's what makes this really interesting.
I mean, Brian, that's why we're film guys, right? Like film and context kind of all fit together, right? Like we know, I mean, it took me about 10 snaps, not even 10 snaps, maybe 5 snaps watching Puka Nacua to say like, oh, he's a good player, man. Like that's a good football player. Like he's a really good football player. I mean, it's one of those situations where you have to understand. It's like right now, what would Notre Dame's offense look like? Even worse right now if they didn't have Michael Mayer for 2 or 3 of those football games, right? Like that's basically what it is. I mean, because Michael Mayer is the best tight end in college football, arguably, right up there with Brock Bowers. Like, take your pick on that one. But Puka Nacua's impact is what Michael Mayer is.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
You know how good Notre Dame played against North Carolina last week?
Yes.
Take Lorenzo Styles and Michael Mayer out of the lineup.
It's not great, man. It's not great.
That's Gunnar Rom. That's their version. That's what Gunnar and Puka are for them.
Yes, 100%.
Right? That's the reality of it. And they didn't have them in the 2 games against Baylor and Oregon. They didn't. So I think that matters, right? And the other guys are, Keanu Hill. I like him. He's a big. He's listed 6'4", 215. We were talking before the show. I'm actually going to take this down, Ryan. Let's just kind of quickly go through the numbers real quick and let people see them. But I don't really want to spend a lot of time on the numbers of this matchup because, as I said, I think they're very misleading for both teams.
Yes,
and aren't really truly indicative of what both of these teams are on either side of the ball for those reasons. But here's the part of this that is interesting when you look at the on paper matchup and then the practical matchup for me is when I look at BYU, I see a team offensively that they have a dynamic quarterback.
Yes.
And that is a position that has given Notre Dame a lot of problems. And they haven't had their best weapons. It's as simple as that. You can't take players that good. And Gunnar Romney's a compliment, but it's Keanu Hill, right? Listen to 6'4", 215. He looks bigger than that. And you look at Chase Roberts, he's got some decent numbers this year.
Great last name, by the way.
I know, right? He's got 15 catches for 223 yards and a touchdown. Cody Epps is, freshman who's got 198 yards with 21 catches, 3 touchdowns. Their tight ends have combined for 18 catches and over 200 yards. The problem is for them is those guys have been asked to be number 1s and 2s when Puka and Gunnar are out.
Yeah.
And Gunnar's a complimentary player too, right? Like if Gunnar plays and Puka doesn't, Gunnar's not as good because he's not a number 1. He's a good route runner, good hands, good size and that kind of thing. Puka is the key to me to this whole thing.
Yep.
But when he plays and Gunnar plays, now all of a sudden Keanu Hill's the big guy that you can throw it up to, right? He only needs 2 or 3 catches for 60 yards because he caught a couple balls where he's matched up against a smaller corner. He just outplays you for the ball, which we saw happen to Notre Dame last week. Then you look at like Chase Roberts. You put him in a complimentary role. You put the tight ends in complimentary roles. When you put the top 2 guys back in the lineup, all those other guys get bumped down the list. They don't have to be the guy now, and it makes them better in their roles. And so that's why I think this is a much more dangerous matchup than maybe people think. If you watch the Oregon game, just imagine what Notre Dame would look like if you took Lorenzo Styles and Michael Mayer out of their lineup. And 100%. That's what BYU was playing without. So the other thing that surprises me too, Ryan, is I was expecting BYU to be a much more physical team this year. On offense, and they're not. Clark Barrington's the only guy that I watched that is really like he gets after it in the run game. That's something to surprise. They look more like Lavelle Edwards BYU than the more physical BYU we saw under Bronco Mendenhall.
Yeah.
And that surprised me a little bit. Even a noticeable drop-off since last year. Right? I mean, Ryan, this is a team you talk about. They're not really. You said it. They're not very good at running the football. I mean, that's what you said. They're not. And here's the thing. Let's pull their rankings back up just for this instance, right?
It's misleading, man. Look at it.
Yep. But you look at their rushing yards, 152.6 a game. But they rushed for 314 yards against South Florida, 188 against Wyoming. They went for 83 and 61 against Baylor and Oregon, respectively, and averaged 2.5 yards per carry against both teams. Now, again, when you don't have your big play receiver, it makes it easier to defend the run game, but not that much easier, right? Like Notre Dame still would have run the football against North Carolina without Michael Mayer and Lorenzo Styles, maybe not as effectively because there wasn't the pass game threat, but they're not average. They're not going for 70 yards and 2.5 a carry, even without those guys, right? But then you look at last year, Ryan, and they were a different team. 231 against Utah. 221 against Utah State, 238 against Washington State, 385 against Virginia. Their bad game against a Power 5 team last year was 167 yards and 3.98 yards per carry against USC in a road win over USC. Even since last year, they've taken a step back from a physicality standpoint. They're more focused on movement, like offensive line, like athleticism type of movement, and pass blocking. I was really surprised at how, finesse they are up front. That was a really interesting part, which does not bode well for them because that's what North Carolina is. And we saw what Notre Dame's front did to North Carolina's really potent running attack that is built more on zone, finesse, RPO, stuff like that. Notre Dame just blew them up. And that's what BYU does. So I'm really curious how BYU counters that in this game, Ryan. Very interested to see how that goes.
Yeah, we were texting about it a little last night, Brian. Obviously, Tyler Algier was a big loss for them, right? Like, he was a fantastic running back over the last couple of years, especially last season for them. But and he's playing really well for the Falcons. I don't know if you saw, but he had 10 carries for 85 yards, I think, or something like that. So he averaged like 8.5 yards a carry, and only his second game back.
1,600 yards and 23 touchdowns last year.
He was dynamic, and I think that's where I want to start. Right, losing Tyler Algier is going to take you back a step, sure. You bring in Christopher Brooks from Cal, who is a steady, solid runner, right?
He's a grinder.
He's a grinder. He's averaging 6 yards a carry, and that is just not what I see on film from this running game. To be completely honest, he's a guy that's going to keep you on schedule, but he's not a guy that's going to rip off runs. He's nothing dynamic, right? That's what I wrote about him.
You know who other big play runner's been this year, Ryan?
Jared Hall.
You know this. No.
Puka Nacua.
Yeah, true. He went for 75 yards on a jet sweep the first play of the game, or first play of the season.
I know he's played very limited, obviously, with the injury, but he has more rushing yards than he does receiving yards right now. He's got 2 carries for 80-something yards right now.
90. 4 for 90, because he had 3 for 76 against South Florida, 2 touchdowns, and he went 1 for 14 against Wyoming. Yeah. Yep.
It's interesting, though. But to the offensive line point, which I think is a great thing to kind of harp on and talk about, right? Left tackle Blake Freeland, great foot quickness, incredible athletes, length. He's got a verified 35-inch arms, man. He is
and he's 6'8", right?
He's 6'8". Former tight end quarterback coming out of high school. So he is that blindside protector at left tackle. But what he struggles with is power. He doesn't he does not counteract power very well. Really nice athletic upside, though, no doubt. I like him a ton as far as NFL draft circles. I think that's a kid that you develop. He's a starting left tackle in the next level, but power is not his friend right now. And I wrote in the piece that I think that Notre Dame has some very advantageous battles on the defensive line versus offensive line, right? Because you have Isaiah Foskey and Riley Mills versus a player like Blake Freeland. I'm going to take that matchup for Notre Dame just because they're so much more physically they're more physical football players. I think that they have an opportunity to, with natural leverage and just core strength, to win that game. Clark Barrington, I think, is also Notre Dame kind of plays into his favor because he is a mauling player at left guard. Strong.
One of the best guards, if not the best guard they're going to face all year. Him and Andrew Voorhees, to me, are the 2 best guards they're ever going to play all year.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that.
But that sets up what you're about to say, though, Ryan.
Yeah, he's a physical downhill football player, right? He wants to create movement at the point of attack. What does Notre Dame have interior-wise? They have a bunch of guys that are really quick and athletic dudes. So I think that can provide some tough matchups for a guy like a Clark Barrington. Now, Notre Dame can't just go straight into his chest and be like, I'm going to win this matchup, because that's not how you're going to beat Clark Barrington.
Right.
Connor Pay, Harris LaChance, okay football players, but they're the same things, man. They're plotters a little bit, right? I don't think that they want to see a ton of speed inside. Harris LaChance is 6'8", 300+ pounds. Connor Pay is, I think, a true sophomore, if I remember correctly. They're just not great inside. And then the right tackle, Kingsley, who transferred from Oregon, was once a top-level recruit, 5-star, I think, by 247 Sports when he was coming out. He is, for me, I think he's going to be a really, really good football player when he puts it all together. But right now, he's a first-year starter, and he's a little green right now, right? He's a little green behind the ears. So you look at a player like him, I think that this could be a big Justin Adamalola matchup, man. I think that he's the guy that could give him a lot of issues because he handles power better than Blake, but he's one of those guys where just the young person stuff, right? Like stops feet on contact at times, unsure of what he's doing at times, missed assignments, that type of thing. So all that to say is this, I talked about preconceived notions when we start the show, Brian. I think the preconceived notion is that BYU has this dominant offensive line, but I think when you look at it, I don't agree with it. There's a lot of talent on that offensive line. They're a really good pass blocking unit, but the run blocking, I think, is very inconsistent. And I think Notre Dame has a lot of matchups that they can potentially win in this football game, defensive line versus offensive line. I think it kind of matches up well for Notre Dame.
I'm going to say something else too, Ryan. I think a big part of the success Notre Dame has had running the ball in the last two games is they've gotten into different personnel matchups with teams. We talked about this last week. When North Carolina went with their speed look, their 11-10 personnel, Notre Dame put Riley Mills and Jason Adamiola inside. When North Carolina went 12 personnel and put a second tight end in the game or an H-back in the game, Notre Dame put Riley outside, and they went with their bigger personnel. I think we'll see them do that against BYU as well. But here's the other thing. The last two games, we've seen a lot more of a trio of guys that have played snaps together. Jacob Lacey, Chris Smith, and Gabriel Rubio. Now, Jacob Lacey's back to playing like he was before all the shoulder injuries popped in. He's been really good this year in a rotation role. We know about Howard Cross, and we know about Jason Adamiola, athletic, quick guys, great hands. Jason, didn't play great the first two games. He played really well the last two games. Howard Cross has been good all year. But having the beef with Jacob Lacey, who plays bigger than 285, Chris Smith, who's over 300 pounds, and Gabriel Rubio, who's 300 pounds, those three guys combined for 24 snaps against North Carolina. And that's not necessarily a game where you're going to see them play a ton. Jacob Lacey, or the three of them combined for 38 snaps against Cal, who is an offense more geared towards a game for them, right? Yeah. But the point is, the big concern we had was, could Notre Dame match up with teams like BYU who were bigger and physical up the middle, if with only their athleticism? What those three guys have given Notre Dame is the ability to beat you with speed and then put big boys on the field that can handle your physicality. That has made Notre Dame's run defense so much better the last two games, having them as well as the athletic guys, combined with the ability to match up personnel-wise with what teams are putting on the field. I think that is a big reason why. I mean, they've cleaned up some assignment stuff, right, Ryan? But I think that right there is a big reason why, because the Notre Dame linebackers haven't made a ton of plays against the run. The shutting down the run the last two games has been literally 90% about the defensive line dominating. It has. And so and I think the ability to mix up personnel, Riley can play outside, inside, depending on what you're doing. Having Chris Smith, he's been a much more impactful player than I thought he was going to be. Now that they're starting to work Gabriel Rubio into the rotation, he brings you a 300-pounder that can eat up space and knock head. I mean, the kid's got an old style. Did you see his face mask? He's got that old style, like single bar thing. I mean, he is
love that, man.
I'm ready to fight you. I mean, that's what Gabriel says just by his look, and then he plays that way. And then the very next series, Notre Dame could put Jason and Howard Cross on the field together and out-quick you.
Yep.
That makes them very hard to plan for and very hard to defend. And it's a bad matchup for BYU. Now, they got to play to that matchup. But I think it's a matchup that favors Notre Dame, to your point, Ryan. I think you explained that brilliantly.
I think Riley Mills is a big, big player in this football game, too. Because I mentioned, if he's working against a Blake Freeland in pass protection or just at the point of attack, I think he has an advantage from a power perspective. But then to your point, Brian, you move him inside, and he has a quickness and speed advantage against anyone on the interior, too, for BYU. So I truly think that we saw, I guess you can call last week his breakout game with the 2 sacks. 2 weeks ago, if you want to, against North Carolina. But I think this is the game where we get a true inside look into how impactful a Riley Mills can be as an inside and out player. Like, I think that he's really going to have a monster game against BYU.
Yep. Agree. Pass game wise, this is going to be a much more intriguing matchup than it looks like on paper. And this is the toughest test, in my opinion, that Notre Dame's secondary will have faced since, with all due respect to North Carolina, since the Ohio State game. Because North Carolina's kids are, across the board, more athletic than BYU's. Across the board. And Josh Downs is more explosive than Puka. He just is.
Sure.
Josh was still coming back from a knee injury that cost him the previous 3 games, right? So, and the rest of their receivers, it's all scheme related. These kids know how to play. These kids know how to run routes. They have some size. This is going to be and BYU does a lot of stuff that can cause problems for a secondary that can be undisciplined. And that's an issue that Notre Dame has had against North Carolina. It's lack of discipline. Now, I hope that it's just a one-off because we didn't see that. But we also saw that a little bit against Cal, right? Mm-hmm. Cal got that cheap touchdown because Notre Dame wasn't lined up after the questionable, catch ruling.
Yep.
So they're going to do pump fakes on screens because they throw a lot of RPOs, they throw a lot of screens. They're going to stress the linebackers a lot with the pass game, but then they're going to do stuff off that. They're really good about. I mean, sometimes Ryan, they'll like teams like this, and I've seen BYU do this. Well, they'll actually go with a fake before they even run the screen because they know you've seen the screen on film, and they know you're going to be really amped up early to come up and take away that screen game, and they'll pump and then throw like the stutter go. Like the stutter wide fade outside, right? You've got to be very disciplined against this group, very disciplined, and that's why I compare them a lot to Ohio State's receivers. They're different athletes, but the thing about what I'm saying is the thing about Ohio State's pass game, it's more pro style, but they're really good. They know how to run routes, they know how to play the game, they know how to work open. Where UNC is more scheme oriented, and Cal's receivers are just young. They're really talented, but they're young. They're not the advanced players that Ohio State's guys are, right? Yeah. And so that's what I think makes this a challenging matchup. Plus, you have a better quarterback at BYU than you had against Cal or Marshall. Now, Drake May is really good, don't get me wrong, but Jaron's a lot more – I mean, he's like, what, 24, 25 years old?
He's 24 right
Drake
now.
Drake May's like,
25,
what, 19, right? Yeah. Like, this kid's seen some stuff.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Right?
He's been through the ringer. He's a 2016 recruiting class kid, I think. So, yeah.
And that's the thing is you got experienced, smart, well-coached receivers, an experienced, smart, well-coached quarterback. If you're not on top of your game, they can give you problems. And that's the thing. So, and Notre Dame's going to throw a couple freshmen out there. They're going to try to go after Benjamin Morrison with a double move. You definitely know they're going to go after as soon as I see Jaden Mickey on the field, I'm like, I'm trying some kind of double move on him until he shows me he can stop it. And
BYU, to your point, is technically refined and that they will really sell those types of things, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing that I wanted to just kind of relay here because you mentioned it already, but Puka Nacua is a really good football player, in my opinion, right? Then you have guys like, I know someone mentioned Chase Roberts in the chat. I know he has a great last name and everything, but like he's an advanced kid for only being like a sophomore, man. Like he can, yes, I know. I see that. I saw that comment in the chat already. He's
nailed it. The comment was for those listening via podcast. Tende just to put a chat in there. It says the average age is 24. Brian, they are not kids. We are playing family man. That's absolutely right.
Not wrong.
But that leads to it because that can overcome sometimes a lack of athleticism in some instances. But please continue, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, there's some technical refinement, I think, to these wide receivers. I think if healthy, you mentioned Gunnar Romney, we mentioned Puka a ton, Chase Roberts, there's Kyle Hill, the wide receiver. Like, there's a lot of good football players. I think Isaac Rex, when he's healthy, is a good tight end as well. I mean, you pop on, like, the 2020 film with Zach Wilson. I think he had, like, 11 touchdowns that year or something like that, right? Yeah. So he's a good football player. And then I really want to just say, Jaron Hall, it has been awesome to watch Jaron Hall develop because he was obviously sat behind Zach Wilson when Wilson was banged up a few years ago. He came in and he did pretty well, but just the maturation from 2021 to 2022, Jaron Hall has become one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in college football. So Notre Dame fans, do not sleep on this offense, man, because if you're not right, they can score some points on you because they are they have talent offensively. They certainly do.
For those people that care about recruiting rankings, Puka was the number 48 player in the entire country.
Yep.
Coming out of high school, according to 24/7 Sports, when he came out. He is not I don't believe Puka did a mission. I don't think he's one of the kids that's gone. He's a 2019 player. I think he's played all because he went to Washington first before BYU. Yeah. And a lot of kids go on the mission before their freshman year, correct?
Yes, I know. Yeah, they usually have the 2-year mission before the LSD mission.
But he didn't go to BYU at first. He went to Washington at first.
Exactly. So he is a younger guy for BYU standards. The right tackle Kingsley is also not a mission kid, and Blake Freeland also. Yeah,
Right.
and Blake Freeland, even though he's been there the whole time, he's also not a mission
Okay.
guy for BYU as well.
So there are some like that, but
Yeah.
they got 2 kids on their starting offense that were top 50 national recruits. So it's not only these 25-year-old grown
Kingsley
men, right?
Kingsley was a top 10
Yeah.
recruit by 247,
Right.
so, or on 3.
Which was a little nuts.
A little
But
bit, yeah.
yes. But no, he was a top 50 kid. I don't think he was a top 50 kid, just me personally. I think he was more of a top 150 kid because I think he's a little bit slow-footed to me, to be honest with you. But he's a talented kid. So the point is there's some talent on this football team. Like there's this perception, like you said, Ryan, that this is just a bunch of 24-year-old Mormon kids that just know how to play. And there is that, right? But the reason this offense is so good is because it's complemented by some talented kids. It is. And now the age has allowed some guys to mature. Like, I don't know if Jaron Hall would be as good now as if he'd have gone to a college where he didn't go on a Mormon mission, right? I don't know if he would have been as good in his final year when he was 21 or 22 as he is at 24, 25.
Sure.
But that matters. But that's the reality of what Notre Dame is facing on Saturday. So there are weapons there. Having said that, Notre Dame, this is not a team with a lot of speed. Outside of Puka, I think Miles Davis has some speed. He can run for a big kid. He's a 6'1", 210-pound back as well. He can run.
Yep.
Puka can run. The rest of their kids are just really smart, heady football players. And Jaron Hall's a kid that can hurt you with his legs as a quarterback. He's not a runner. He's you know what he is? He's as a runner, he's Ian Book. He's not going to do a ton of designed runs. He'll pull it and keep it a little bit more than but he is going to make his yards on 3rd and 7, and you lose contain, and he steps up and rips you for 15. That's how he's going to hurt you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that's given Notre Dame problems. They got to be prepared for that. But this is a smart, heady football team that I'm still surprised that they're not more physical. That is the one thing that really surprised me, because if you go watch Coach Sataki's early teams, they weren't real athletic, and they really weren't that good, but they were physical.
Yep.
And they've opened things up a lot offensively in recent years. And I like what their offensive coordinator's doing. I think he does some nice things there for them. But they're going to have to be able to establish the run against Notre Dame. They cannot just – if Notre Dame can shut down their run game and make this a pass game, this game won't be close. I really believe that, because I don't think they're good enough on the perimeter. Like, here's where North Carolina could do things to them that BYU can't. Outside of Puka, they don't have other dudes that can just run by you like North Carolina had, where they can turn one little step mistake by Clarence Lewis into an 80-yard touchdown. BYU doesn't have that other than Puka, right? And I doubt Notre Dame is going to overlook him in this game. They're guys that can beat you on 3rd and 9 for a 15-yard gain. That's how they're going to beat you. So if you're smart, if you're disciplined, if you stay in your lanes, if you don't, like, their big plays come from scheme.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And double moves and switches and all the kind of stuff, RPOs and all that. If you play disciplined and you make them one-dimensional, you can shut them down. That's what BYU did, or Oregon did. Oregon completely shut down their run game. Now, again, they didn't have Puka and Gunner in that game, which hurt their ability to then beat you in the pass. But even with them, Ryan, I don't think they can beat Notre Dame one-dimensional. I don't
think so either.
Unless the Notre Dame offense just does nothing. Meaning, let me rephrase. The offense won't be the reason that you lose to BYU. Your defense will not be the reason you lose to BYU if you shut down their run game and make them one-dimensional. It'll have to be because Notre Dame's offense stinks and turns the ball over and stuff like that. Then you lose. But it won't be because of the defense. I don't think they're good enough to beat you one-dimensional. That's where I'm at this point in time.
And could I also say that I see people in the chat talking about Utah State and Wyoming, like, close losses. You know what BYU also did in those games, guys? They won the football games, right?
By double digits. Yes. Notre Dame lost to Marshall, so stop with the BYU only beat Utah State by 12 stuff. Notre Dame lost to Marshall. Okay? They lost to Marshall. And this is what I was saying to you, though. There's this percent. Plus, are we not going to give any credence at all to the fact that they know Utah State's not good, and they were already looking past them to Notre Dame, and that's why they got caught early, but also why they rolled them in the second half? Because the game wasn't nearly as competitive in the second half as it was in the first half.
And BYU also has beaten Baylor, which is a really quality
They're
win.
7-2 against Power 5 teams the last 2 years. Can we stop with the they're not very good stuff? Yeah. All right. I mean, if you're gonna evaluate them off, completely ignore the fact that they beat Baylor and blew out South Florida and all that other kind of stuff, then I mean, I don't know what conversation we're having here at this point in time. So, and Wyoming also is a team that beat Air Force, who's a quality football team this year.
Air Force is a good team this year.
Yeah. So I mean, this is beat Tulsa this year, who's a good football team. Tulsa's having a nice year this year. They're having a nice bounce back year. They're 2-3, but you look at their losses. Cincinnati, they lost by 8 to Ole Miss, and they lost by 3 to Wyoming. Right. So this is a better football team than some of you think. Mm-hmm. Right now, this is also not a football team that if Notre Dame goes out there and plays their A game can still beat them. There are teams like that, right? Clemson can do that. Notre Dame plays their A game and Clemson plays their A+ game. Notre Dame loses. Notre Dame plays their A game and Ohio State plays their A+ game, or USC, then they're going to lose. If Notre Dame plays their A game and BYU plays their A+ game, Notre Dame still wins. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? But that doesn't mean that this isn't a good football team. And that's the frustration with some of the reaction. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and mute that right now. So that's just getting on my nerves. So we'll read the super chat, but you just got to chill out, man. So Ryan, we've done the matchup. I think this is really interesting. I think Notre Dame has the advantage over the BYU defense if they play like they did against Carolina. Yep. The Notre Dame defense against the BYU offense is a little bit of a different story because I think a lot of it depends on how the Notre Dame offense plays. If Notre Dame offense comes out and plays well early, and we'll get into this a little bit more tomorrow when we do our keys to victory. But if you can jump on BYU early, I don't think they're as good of a come-from-behind team as North Carolina was. I don't.
Yeah. I don't think so either. Yeah. It's again, Brian, like if we make this team one-dimensional, if Notre Dame is able to make them one-dimensional, I think that they have a very good chance to win the football game because it's like I watched the run game offensively for BYU, and although it tells me that they are a pretty good running football team, just didn't have that worry in me, man. Like I just didn't look at him and say that team is going to stress you and then make their passing game on lock and they're going to play off of each other really well. I think if Notre Dame's able to take the run game out early, again, Jaron Hall is going to make some plays. Puka Nacua, if healthy, is going to make some plays, sure. But to your point, I think a one-dimensional BYU team is I think you feel good about that matchup in that regard.
And that's what made them so good last year. Is because you had if you couldn't just go out there and play their pass game. You couldn't because if you did, the running back was going to rip. I mean, he would rip you up sometimes anyway. You know what I mean? Like, which is why he's now starting in the National Football League as a rookie, right? Didn't he have like 100 yards? Didn't I see in a stat box he had like 100 yards?
It was I don't know what he finished with, but at one point it was 10 carries for like 85 yards or something like that. Okay. He's pretty good, man. Pretty good. Yeah,
he's and how old is he? Was he an older guy?
I don't think so. I think Algier. I don't think he was a Michigan guy. Yeah,
he's only 22 right now. I'm looking at his numbers now. So yeah, he's a like you said a normal guy.
A normal guy.
He finished with 10 carries for 84 yards this past week.
Yep.
So yeah, and he had a one catch for 20 yards. So a game that Notre Dame should have the advantage on. Tomorrow we'll dive more into the keys. Tonight they're going to have a mailbag tonight. Vince and Sean will have a mailbag tonight. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next as well, so don't go anywhere. But tomorrow Ryan and I will break down the keys to victory for Notre Dame on both sides of the ball. We'll get into more specifics. We'll have some film stuff for you tomorrow because we didn't do that yesterday. We'll have some film stuff to kind of show why these things are keys for you tomorrow. Friday, we'll obviously have our prediction show. We'll preview the Notre Dame game. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the other really interesting matchups in college football, Ryan, because we've said this before. This has been a really fun year so far in college football. I think just at least on paper, some of the top-level matchups this week are very interesting, some of the best we've seen. Tennessee plays at LSU. TCU plays at Kansas is a big game. If I'd have told you that, if you'd have told me that a month ago, I'd have laughed at you. You're like, dude, Kansas – and TCU are going to play in a top 20 matchup in October. I'm like, dude,
awesome, man.
Are we talking like is basketball season moved up this year? Like, are we starting basketball early in the season? Like earlier, does it start in October now or something like that? But it's a big matchup. We'll talk about that. We'll talk Oklahoma and Texas. Here's the crazy thing is there is a matchup of top 20 teams going on the Big 12 this weekend, and it ain't Texas and Oklahoma.
That's so
there is a matchup of two unranked teams happening in the Big 12 this week. And guess who it is? It's Oklahoma and Texas. And I just want to kind of LOL at the people that still gave votes in the top 25 to Oklahoma, yet Notre Dame didn't get any. Notre Dame doesn't deserve any, don't get me wrong, but neither does Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Notre Dame lost 2 close games. Oklahoma's gotten rolled in their 2 losses because their loss to Kansas State was not as close as the final score.
No.
It was not. They scored late to make it competitive. Kansas State dominated that game. TCU dominated that game. Oklahoma stinks right now. And, Texas is a stop away against Alabama from being ranked and then just showing up against Texas Tech. I still don't understand that one, but that's a very curious game. We're going to preview that. We'll preview some other things. We'll do those tomorrow, Saturday, 10 a.m. Sean and Vince will be back for the countdown to kickoff matchup or discussion. They'll preview the Notre Dame BYU game and some of the other big games of the week, talk about some different things and what we've talked about. So a lot going on here the rest of this week. So before we leave, and I just realized we had the IB Nation Sports Talk thing up the entire time. Whoops. So we will obviously we will have a mailbag next, but before we go, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and share this podcast. So Ryan, let's dive into our mailbag. We did have a couple super chats here. We got one from Pete Weber. Who do you think you are? I am. Okay. Thank you for the super chat there, Pete.
You don't know that? You don't know the Pete Weber thing? He's the bowler.
Yeah, the bowler. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I know. I just don't know where that's, why that's relevant to what we're doing here, but I appreciate that. Wicked Bronco Productions with a super chat. We had to mute him for a second, but I'm sure he'll be back at some point. If you watch BYU versus Utah State, who lost to Weber State, Utah State ran all over this BYU team. So did Wyoming. Notre Dame will win by 14, like the North Carolina game. No one is saying that they're not capable of that. Mm-hmm. I think the conversation that needs to be had that is a little bit irrational. First of all, Wyoming rushed for 124 yards and 3.7 yards per carry. So I don't know what you're talking about in that regard. So Baylor also averaged 2.9 yards per carry against BYU's defense. South Florida had 107 yards and 4.0 yards per carry. Utah State ran for over 200 yards because they had a couple big runs. They averaged 4.2 yards per carry. That's not exactly running all over a team. The only team that really just dominated BYU up front was Oregon.
Yep.
Right. And so they played bad against Utah State and still won by double digits. Right. Notre Dame should win this game, Ryan.
Yes.
They should win this game, in my opinion, by double figures. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between saying what they should do and then being honest and objective and saying Notre Dame hasn't earned the benefit of the doubt yet that they will show up and play that way. They haven't. This is a team that lost to Marshall. What would you rather have, an ugly win over Utah State and Wyoming or a loss to Marshall?
The win all day.
Exactly.
And Brian, exactly. We've talked about this before, but I hate this, a team that lost to this team, that lost to that team thing. Like, I think transitive property is what someone put in the chat. Like, it's
really bad
football. Notre Dame lost to Marshall, who lost to Bowling Green.
Right.
What are we doing?
Does that mean Bowling Green is going to beat Notre Dame? And didn't they lose to somebody? Hold on. Who is their other loss to? Yeah, they lost to Troy by 9. So does that mean Troy can beat Notre Dame? Right? I mean, and Troy lost to App State. Well, App State lost to North Carolina, who Notre Dame beat. Right? Like, so this stuff is just useless. Right? It's stuff is useless. So those are some of the things that you look at and say, like, it's just not helpful. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. There's a lot of things that factor into why teams play certain ways, certain days. Like, I feel like if Notre Dame would have had a bye week after losing to Ohio State, then played Marshall, I don't think they lose because they'd had more time to get over the emotionalness of the loss, which is something we talked about in the offseason, is how would Notre Dame handle whatever happened against Ohio State.
Yep. So
those are the different things that you look at. So yeah, that's kind of where we're going to be at. So that's, thank you for the super chat, Wicked Bronco Productions. I do appreciate that. I just wish you'd kind of chill out a little bit with just this BYU sucks talk. I don't know where it comes from, but BYU doesn't suck. They're 7-2 against ranked teams. And that includes a win over Baylor, who is the reigning Big 12 champs. They also beat Utah last year. Right? Okay. So they beat Utah. So let's do it this way, Ryan. So they beat Utah by 9 last year.
Mm-hmm.
Utah lost to Ohio State by 3 in the Rose Bowl. So does that mean that BYU was better than Ohio State last year?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what that means.
What I thought. That's what I thought. Exactly. John A1 says, if Notre Dame plays to potential on offense, should we see another 40-plus point performance? John, if they play to their potential and score anything over 31, I think that's a good performance because I think they'll kind of control the clock a little bit. I think that they'll BYU will have some success on offense, I think, a little bit. I think part of it depends on what the defense does, to be honest with you. I think Notre Dame scoring 40-plus is going to be a lot more is going to have a lot more involved with the Notre Dame defense than it will the offense, in my opinion, if that makes sense, Ryan. I think they're going to have to limit the possessions, limit the time of possessions and stuff like that if they're going to get to 40.
Yeah, I mean that's the context of whether you get to 40 or not. But I mean, John, to the baseline of the question, can Notre Dame score 40? It's possible. Sure. I mean, it is. I mean, I look, there's very good parts of BYU's defense, but there's also parts that Notre Dame can take advantage of, in my opinion. There is. But again, to Brian's point, I think that you can score it in the 30s and still consider it a good performance against Notre Dame because, again, BYU is a good football team. Yes. So I think that we need to keep that context.
Much better defense than North Carolina. I see people saying, they're worse than North Carolina. No, they're not. They're not worse than North Carolina.
Oh, they're a better defense.
They're much better than North Carolina on offense.
Oh, yes.
So if Notre Dame wins like 34-20 and they execute well, I'll say, that's kind of close to playing to their. You beat the number 16 team in the country, a 4-1 team that's 7-2 against Power 5 opponents over the last 2 years. You go in a neutral field, that's 2 time zones away from where you live, and you beat them 34-20. You played a good football game. Yep. Will there be things that you can say, improve here a little bit there? Sure. But to your point, though, John, could Notre Dame, if Notre Dame scores over 40 against BYU, they didn't just play to their potential. They played
really well,
outstanding football on offense. Or it was like the Wisconsin game where they had a couple, late game, add them in to kind of pad the stats a little bit more than you add. It was really a 24-13 game against Wisconsin, really. If you just look at the Notre Dame offense, they only scored 24 points. They scored a touchdown on special teams. They scored 2 touchdowns on defense, right? If something like that happens, then sure, it could be a 41-13 game. Is Notre Dame capable offensively of going out and ripping them for 40-plus just because they're that good? Sure. But they'd have to play much better than we've seen so far this year, in my opinion, Ryan. So I'm not sure if you agree with that. They're not North Carolina, folks. I mean, they're not. North Carolina is giving up 193 rushing yards a game. Do y'all get that? That's with keeping Virginia Tech to 99 and Florida A&M to 56, right? They've given up 235, 287, and 288 this year. The most of Baylor's given or BYU's given up is 212.
Brian, you ready for this question? Here's the question. This is a funny one. What's worse? Iowa's offense or North Carolina's defense?
Iowa's offense. No, North Carolina's defense. Yeah, no, Iowa's offense. Iowa's offense.
Yeah. I probably would go with Iowa's offense too, but the fact that you have to think there for a split second says
a lot. Yeah, it says a lot.
It does say a lot.
It says a lot. I was like, no, wait, hold on, no. Because here's the thing: at least North Carolina's defense can say we had a good game.
Mm-hmm.
They had a really good game against Virginia Tech. Their defense. I'll tell you what. Kudos to Mac Brown and Gene Chizik for getting them to play the way they did against Virginia Tech.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were coming off of a game where at home they got their butts kicked. I mean, they got their butts kicked by Notre Dame. And a week later, they come out against a Virginia Tech team who the year before kicked their butts on their own field, right? Beat them 17-10, and they smashed them and held them to 10 points. Ryan, they held Virginia Tech to 273 yards of offense. Notre Dame had more rushing yards than that, and Notre Dame had more passing yards than that. That says a lot about that coaching staff that they got those kids to bounce back that quickly. Now, does Virginia Tech stink? Yes, but so did Florida A&M, who was out without 22 kids and scored 24 on North Carolina and had more yards than almost 100 more yards. That's about 60 more yards than what Virginia Tech had. That's a good bounce back performance. So at least they've done that once. Iowa has yet to have a game like that on offense, in my opinion.
My favorite thing was that Florida A&M game because Twitter is super hyperbolic, so everyone's like, "Oh wow, this Musa kid from Florida A&M, the quarterback, he could play, man, he could play." And then you just are like, "Oh wait, North Carolina's just really bad on defense." Yes. It's more of that.
Yep, absolutely. So I want to bring up this super chat. Matt Romero with a super chat. Matt said, Coach D sighting at work made my day. So I got to share this story, Matt. So we all know what's going on with our dog Rita. So I had to go to PetSmart on Monday, and I'm doing some shopping, and I'm getting some dry food. We got her some new toys because she likes to tear up ropes, and she like literally tries to untie the knots. She'll just like start pulling at like the string, right? Just like shredding, and then like she'll like kick it out. It's hilarious watching her do it. But we're like, with all the issues she's having, it's probably not good that she's doing that. So we got her some ropes that don't tear apart. We got her some other things. Anyway, so I'm driving home, and it's like this. I'm at a stop light, and there's an ambulance in front of me. And all of a sudden, the back door of the ambulance comes open. Now, that's not something you expect to see when you're driving down the road. And I see someone point at me and go, Coach D. And I'm like, hey, man. I'm like, so that was Matt Romero, who's been he's one of the Irish Breakdown, Ryan. You may not know this because you weren't here yet, but Matt is one of the OGs to Irish Breakdown. The chat, the message board, all of it. So, and he's a medic, obviously. So we really appreciate him and what he does and how he serves our community. But also, it was great seeing him. So and then he sent me a DM. So I was like, I don't know who that was. Kind of looked familiar. And then he sent me the DM, let me know it's him. So and that was pretty awesome, man. It definitely made my day as well. So I really appreciate that very, very much. Very, very much. So that was fun, but I wasn't expecting that. Like, you don't expect like to see an ambulance door open up when you're like on the road at a stoplight, and then to see a dude like pointing at you. Because at first I was like, what's he doing? I'm like, is there something is my trunk about to pop open? Like I'm thinking something was wrong. Did I leave like my wallet on top of my car? Something like that. Then I figured out what he was saying. So that was a pretty cool moment. It's pretty fun. So I appreciate that, Matt. Very, very much. Got another super chat here from Mark E. Stewart. And Mark says, as a bettor, I know this BYU team is solid, but I hope we knock them off. The national media and voters see it as a quality win that it would be. And I think that's accurate. I think that's accurate. I think Notre Dame would gain a lot of respect from the national media, from pollsters and all that kind of stuff if they're able to beat BYU, especially if they could do it convincingly, Ryan, because BYU's got some really interesting games coming up, right? Where they play Arkansas next week at home, right? Wow. If you can smack BYU and they give Arkansas a game, then what does that kind of do for your perception? Because people are super high on Arkansas right now, although they have lost 2 in a row. But they're the darling. They love Sam Pittman and that team, and rightfully so. Arkansas is a fun team to watch. They really are. I love KJ Jefferson. So, I think it would definitely perception matters. It doesn't matter when it comes to the college football playoff. It doesn't matter in the things that ultimately matter. You don't win games because of perception, but it matters from the standpoint of just the overall health of your program, and it really matters from a recruiting standpoint, Ryan, is where that perception can really have an impact. So, I agree with that, Mark. We do have another super. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say, and with the season you got off to with the first couple of games, you want to start stacking quality wins, right? Like he called it a quality win, and I agree, Mark. And I still think North Carolina was a quality win. I think BYU would be a quality win. Start stacking those together. That's
Cal was a quality win. Maybe not it wasn't as impressive as it should have been
from a national perspective.
But Cal's a 3-2 foot. I mean, if Cal is your third best win, you're in a pretty good place. That's kind of the point that I'm making. They're 3-2 right now, and they play at Colorado this week. So they're better be 4-2 if Justin Wilcox wants to keep his job. So that's going to be a hard one to come back from. We have another super chat from Wicked Bronco Productions. He says, I just think BYU is not as good as people think. That's all. They're a good team, which is exactly what we're saying. But if Notre Dame wins, they won't be ranked. Anyway, I think we go 10-2, and the Marshall game will be shown as a fluke. Sorry. That's all fine and dandy. But you're projecting a lot that we can't know right now. Yeah. And that's the point. And the point of this breakdown is we're going to give all due respect to the opponent. If a team's not good, we'll tell you they're not good. But I remember people laughing when we said this Marshall team is a decent football. Oh, you're laughing. This team sucks. And well, look what happened. Hey, this Cal defense is pretty good. No, they suck. You're talking about they're going to and then look what happened, right? And what we said last week was North Carolina's defense is really trash. And we were honest about that. And guess what? They were. We're going to give you an honest view of who this team is. We're not going to pump a team up just because. We're not going to tear a team down just because. This is that we give honest analysis. And BYU may not be ranked if they lose to Notre Dame. They still might, because people know that this is a preseason top 5 team. that had – look, right now, if Notre Dame beats BYU, the perception is they had one bad day. They had one bad day. They had a freaking bad day against Marshall. They beat Cal, who's got a winning record. They beat North Carolina, who's now 4-1. They would have beat BYU, who's now 4-1, and beat Baylor, right? I mean, early in the season, they got a win over Baylor. They may not be ranked. I don't think they fall out of the top 25 with just – now, if Notre Dame smashes them, then they fall out of the top 25.
Yeah.
Like if Notre Dame goes out there and beats them like 45-20, then, yeah, I think they fall out of the top 25. But I think if Notre Dame wins like 27-24, I don't think they fall out of the top 25. This is a good football team. And you say they're a good team. Well, that's all we're saying. I don't know anyone that thinks BYU is a top 10 team. No one is arguing that BYU, if they went out, could be a playoff team. Nobody's arguing that. I don't think they would be, right? But you say they'd have a win over Notre Dame, they'd have a win over Baylor, and a win over Arkansas, and a win over Stanford. So maybe they could be. But that's not the conversation. We're trying to say they have a shot to be the highest-ranked Power 5 team, which right now I think they are. Am I forgetting someone, Ryan?
I don't
What
think so.
non-Power 5 team right now is ranked higher than BYU in the rankings? I don't. Now, again, it doesn't matter what the AP poll says. It's really about what the College Football Playoff Committee says. But right now, all we have is that, and there's only 2 non-Power 5s ranked in the top 25. BYU is 16, Cincinnati 24. That's it. And Cincinnati's not even in the top 25 on the coaches poll.
Yeah, and I would say this too. I think that someone said earlier, I forget who it was, that they thought that BYU is not a top 25 team. I would just push back, man. I say that I think their top 25 is validated. Like I think they're a good football team. All right, exactly. Who's the next man in, I guess.
If they're not, who should be? He says Illinois should be ranked. Illinois lost to Indiana. Right? So why should they be ranked? This is non-Power 5 bias is what we're seeing from some people. Right? I mean, you're talking about Illinois team that lost to Indiana, and they should be in the top 25 over BYU, who has a win over Baylor. With all due respect, beating Baylor is a whole lot more impressive than doing anything against Wisconsin, right? I mean, it just is. Wisconsin's not good. They're not good at all, right? I mean, so no. They smacked us. I don't care if they smacked us. Wisconsin sucks. Wisconsin's 2-3. You get that, right? Wisconsin's 2-3, right? They suck. So, it's if BYU was already in the Pac-12 or in the Big 12, people probably say something different, right? This is a good football team. And this is what bothers me, Ryan. This is why it bothers me. Because what happens is Notre Dame wins 37-30, and Notre Dame's not that good. The same people that thought BYU sucked are the ones that cry when they don't beat them by 40. The people that have an appreciation for who Notre Dame is and who BYU is enjoy those wins more. Hey, yeah, they should have won by more, but they beat a quality football team today. And that's the whole point, right? And, it frustrates me when we get people like that. But I'm honestly done engaging that at this point in time. So we're going to now focus on BYU.
Can I give you a compliment real quick? You like compliments occasionally.
Me or
right?
him?
You.
Me? Yeah, occasionally. Yeah, because, I get ripped all the time. I get emails and DMs, so yeah.
Last week, what a call by you about the Paul Chris thing, by the way. You called that one, man. You called
which one? That he'd be done if they lost Illinois? That
it may be the demise of Paul Chris that lost Illinois. So you called
because I picked them winning that game. I picked Illinois winning that game. I got the Purdue. You got the Minnesota one right. Purdue beat Minnesota, but I did not like the way Wisconsin played.
Dude, I had such a good week of predicting games last week, and my upset pick was like 10 seconds from winning.
What was your upset pick again?
Was Coastal losing to Georgia Southern, and Coastal ended up winning with less than a minute left. I'm like, you jerks.
Yeah. I went 5-0 in our. I think you did too, right?
I went 5-0, and then I just missed the upset pick. Yep.
We both went 5-0 last week in our official picks. But yeah, it was a very interesting week of football, man. Very interesting week. The one I got wrong, the one I got really wrong was, and we also said. We had I didn't predict TCU to beat Oklahoma, but I said if TCU starts well, I think they could get going because I don't like Oklahoma right now. No. Get to the next one from Brandon Plensner says, B. Ryan, with Mickey and Morrison already steadily in the quarterback rotation, which of Barnes, Riley, Tucker, and Lewis do you see moving to safety next year, and who definitely stays a cornerback? I could see Barnes and Riley both being safeties.
Well, I mean, they already started the cross training stuff with Barnes, right? So that's a pretty good indicator that's probably where it might go.
I actually see. So, Brandon, here's my take on this, Ryan. And this is about something you and I talked about. The way that Cam Hart's playing right now, he's been okay. I don't know if leaving for the NFL after this year would be an ideal thing for him, the way he's playing right now. He's not going to get picked real high. He's not playing really well.
And I have an NFL draft piece that'll be coming out sometime in the near future on the site.
It'll be on the board later today. I'm going to put it up on the board because it was some really good intel that I want to make premium for our subscribers.
Yeah. But so just a quick peek into that is that, there's a mixed bag on Cam Hart at the next level right now. We'll just leave it at that for now. So to your point, Brian, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Cam Hart is gone after this year.
Yeah. Now, the reason that matters here, Ryan, is if he comes back, that gives you a lot more flexibility about what you can do with Clarence Lewis. Because you'll have Cam Hart, Jaden Mickey, and Benjamin Morrison.
Yep.
Now, the way I see it playing out is if Cam Hart comes back, what happens is your two outside guys stay the same. It's Benjamin Morrison's already starting, and Cam Hart is there. I'm sliding Jaden Mickey right inside to replace Tariq Bracy. Yeah, that's about as easy of a no-brainer move for me as possible, right? Mm-hmm. Then you look at, okay, is Chance Tucker ready to crack the rotation and help out? I think next year is when you could start to really see Chance make a push to sort of take over the Clarence Lewis role as, that third corner playing outside. You could also see Jaden Mickey do that at times when you're playing a more traditional team and you don't need a rover or a nickel. But I think when you look at Notre Dame's schedule and you look at the teams that they play, more often than not, you're going to be in a lot of nickel stuff. And you look at their schedule next year: Ohio State, USC, Wake Forest, Clemson, Duke, Louisville, NC State. Those are all teams where you're going to be in nickel a lot, right? And so you're going to need a fourth corner in those games to be your third outside guy. Is it Chance Tucker? Is it Barnes? Is it Riley? I think the winner of that battle, you kind of feel you have to stay at safety unless you want to just keep Clarence Lewis there and move somebody else to corner. I feel like Clarence Lewis is too good of a football player not to play more at a spot where I think his game better translates. So I think Clarence Lewis becomes a solid corner who is where he should be, the number 3 guy behind two really talented guys in Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison. As a safety, I think he's a starting caliber player to a place like Notre Dame. He is a more athletic version of DJ Brown, in my opinion. That's how I see him. Then if you got Ryan Barnes there, you've got Ramon Henderson, Xavier Watts, and then, of course, you'll have Peyton Bowen coming in next year as well. I think the freshman will have a chance to impact. I think Peyton Bowen is the kind of guy that could have an impact on defense very similarly to Benjamin Morrison. You're not – and now I didn't predict this from Benjamin Morrison. I thought Benjamin would play as a freshman and then start next year. I mean, you know that, Ryan. Nobody's been higher on Benjamin Morrison than I have, and he's still better than I thought he was going to be. Earlier. Mm-hmm. But I think Clarence could be a really good starting safety. Yep. But somebody's going to have to you can't just move him and hope somebody replaces him well. Somebody's got to force him to be able to play safety. Is that Chance Tucker? Is it Philip Riley? Is it Ryan Barnes? I don't know the answer to that. Or is it Christian Gray or Micah Bell? I think Micah Bell's probably going to need a year to develop physically and just the technique. But his speed is such that you're like, dude, you got to find a home for him. Like, you got to find a play. And I'd say maybe consider making him the number 2 behind Jaden Mickey in the nickel just early on and letting him kind of get used to that or something. But somebody's going to have to force that to me, Brandon. Somebody's going to have to force Clarence Lewis to move to safety. But I think Philip Riley, the problem with Philip Riley is the struggle he's had at corner, Ryan, is he's not a real instinctive guy. And that doesn't bode well at safety either.
No.
So I don't think it helps you at either spot to me. And I don't know if Chance Tucker has the frame to be a safety right now. I think Ryan Barnes and Clarence Lewis are the two best options.
Clarence Lewis at safety is really interesting, Brian. I mean, we talked about this before, though, because he's a guy that literally can rotate down and play man. He can play, from depth. He can tackle. I've really liked the opportunity for Clarence Lewis potentially because I think that you can use him as a versatile piece on the back end. And then you start thinking Peyton Bowen coming in. What if Brandon Joseph comes back? Then your safety group is just whoa, man, that's a lot of positive and possibilities for that safety group. Yep. So I agree.
And along that, Ian Johnson asks, could Christian Gray be a serious contributor as a freshman like Morrison? It depends on whether or not Cam Hart comes back.
Yeah.
I mean, if Cam Hart doesn't come back, I think you're going to need one of those freshmen to push, some of the older guys. And he could. Christian Gray could. He could. I think Benjamin Morrison is a better prospect. I graded him higher, but Christian Gray's and he's having a heck of a senior year. Yes. You talk about a kid that's playing. I mean, think about who they've played. Springfield from Ohio, who's got like 3 Division I athletes on their team. They've played IMG. They just played Christian Brothers this past week. You're like, that dude's being tested.
Oh, and he just played against Ryan Wingo in St. Louis.
That's right, University. That's right. Yeah. Yep. So that kid is going to be battle tested when he gets to Notre Dame next year.
Brian, we talked about it on the Monday show, but he gave up 2 catches for 13 yards against Ryan Wingo. So Christian Gray's playing his butt off, man. He really is.
I talked to Sean last night, and he said he talked to Christian about that. Christian was like, no, they're quarterback. And he would not be like I dominated him. It was just really like humble. But yeah, he's a good football player.
Well, according to Sean on the post today on the message board, which is why you should be on boards.irishbreakdown.com because there's a lot of good stuff. They have a little nickname for that St. Louis crew, which is pretty cool.
I love it, by the way. Yeah. I love it, by the way. I think he'll have a shot. And then Micah Bell's speed alone makes him a contender to play as a freshman.
He's got to be in the special teams conversation.
He's just too dynamic to not be doing something. You can't keep a legit low 4.3 guy on the sidelines, in my opinion, unless he just the only exception is if he just physically can't play. If he's just physically not ready, we're afraid he might get hurt. That's the only exception to me of in that instance for me, Ryan. 5-state revival, Brian and Ryan. If you were a 5-star this was asked yesterday, Ryan, so I'll let you give this answer. 5-state revival, Brian Ryan, if you were a 5-star high school quarterback recruit today, which schools would make your top 5 list and why? Also, which school do you think would you ultimately commit to? So you want to go ahead and take a crack at that?
Yeah, that me in the current state, I'm a Notre Dame fan, right? Sure. So Notre Dame would be in my top 5, but then after that, it would be who develops quarterbacks at a high level, right? So Ohio State would be in that conversation. Yep. I would actually love to be with Steve Sarkisian, if I'm being honest.
That was my other one. Because I was asked top 3 yesterday. It was Notre Dame, Texas, and Alabama, or Notre Dame, Texas, and Ohio State. So far, we're on par. Yes.
I top 3, I think is pretty nice. I guess Georgia might be in that conversation because
as long as Monken's there. Yeah.
Exactly. As long as Monken's there, because they make things pretty easy for a quarterback. So for a 5-star, you should have a lot of opportunity. Yep. So that would be 4. And I don't know who the 5th would be, if I'm being honest.
It's definitely not USC because there's no way in heck I'd want to live in California. You know that, right?
Sure.
You know who I might – well, no, because Seattle's pretty nuts too. I'll say, a guy that I might sneakily decide to look at is Kalen DeBoer at Washington.
Yeah,
Kalen DeBoer. That's a real sneaky potential option right now. I'd have to think about who my 5th would be. I'll tell you what,
maybe Tennessee.
Yep. There you go.
Yeah, Josh Heupel, man. I wouldn't mind playing
for him. That'd be another one. And Nashville's a place I could see myself, or Knoxville, I should say, is a place I could see myself.
Greatest stat ever. Last 2 years of Hendon Hooker as a starter, he's thrown 48 touchdowns, only thrown 2 interceptions. It's fantastic, man. Incredible.
Nuts. Absolutely nuts. Yeah, that would be. Now, who would I ultimately commit to? Here's the problem. Of those 5 schools, the one question mark in regard to developing quarterbacks is Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, I'm a Notre Dame fan, but I'd have to think long and hard about whether or not I was willing to take that chance of committing there when there's the uncertainty of, well, can they develop me? Yep. So it would be tough. I would probably say right now, I'd probably still pick Notre Dame just because if I'm a 5-star quarterback, I'd be pretty confident in myself, right? Mm-hmm. Like, okay. Yeah, sure. But those guys aren't me, right? Because yesterday the question was if you had a kid, I'd look at it differently as a parent than I would if I was the 5-star commit. As a parent, I'm looking at it more analytically, more thoughtful. Like, but as a kid, I'd be like, if Notre Dame's my dream school, Notre Dame's where I want to go, and I'd love Marcus Freeman as a recruit. I would love Marcus Freeman as a recruit. And I get to play behind a Harry Heastan offensive line. Are you kidding me? Of course. Well, they haven't developed quarterbacks. Yeah, but those guys aren't me. Right. That's how I would feel. That's just, I felt that way and I played Division III football. Right. And so if I was a 5-star quarterback, I'd definitely feel that way. So I'd probably still pick Notre Dame, but it'd be really hard to say no to Sark and Ryan Day. If I was a big time quarterback, it'd be really hard.
100%.
Really hard. Because you could sit for 2-3 years at Ohio State, start for 2, and then be a first-round draft pick.
Yeah. It's funny that neither one of us picked to play for Bill O'Brien.
Oh, God, no. I wouldn't even visit Alabama. He'd call an offer, man, and start laughing at him. Like, dude, I've Well, I guess I should say that because if I was a 5-star recruit, I wouldn't have the – I've had personal experience with Bill O'Brien that makes me dislike him a lot. Like, being at camps and in coaching circles. I wouldn't know that if I was a recruit, but it wouldn't take me very long to hang around Bill O'Brien and be like, nah, dude, you ain't that guy. You ain't that guy. So I'd rather go to Auburn and play for Brian Harsin than play for you, which tells you how little chance I would want to play at Alabama. And I say this, Alabama has their coordinator situation right now is a mess because I don't think Pete Golding's a very good defensive coordinator either. He's just getting by on talent. I'll say this. You give Al Golden the talent or Brent Venables the talent that Pete Golding is working with on defense, and I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that a lot, but he wastes it. He really does, in my opinion. They're not nearly as good on defense as they should be, Ryan, at Alabama. Not nearly as good.
I agree.
Rob Osgood says, my grandfather always told me this, show me, don't tell me. That is what this BYU game means to me, Rob, and you nailed it. Nailed it. Jacob Steele says, what a show yesterday. I highly encourage anyone who didn't get a chance to listen to Brian and Sean, please do yourself a favor and listen in. Great insight on Tobias and Reese in general. I think you should definitely listen to yesterday's show if you didn't get a chance to listen. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Jacob. I appreciate you very much. Kirk Roberts, is this Ryan's cousin Kirk, says if Notre Dame comes out aggressive with their running game and put a spy on the BYQB so he doesn't get garbage yards, we'll win by 10. Ryan, I'm going to ask you this.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily – I'm not a big fan of the spy unless you're playing Lamar Jackson type of guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Dynamic.
Yeah. And they didn't put a spy on Drake May, and after the first series, they shut him down. I still think if you force Jaron Hall to stay in the pocket, that you can and you see what they did last week was they did a really good job of pushing the pocket back, but then not losing gap integrity after the first drive. And then they had some stunts on third down that allowed them to kind of, there was one time they ran a quarterback draw and Maris just literally stunted right into it. I thought they executed better. I don't think you need a spy to stop the quarterback runs. You just need to be more disciplined because what they were doing in the first game, and Al Golden talked about this last week before the game, as an interior defender, you cannot run past the quarterback. And there was two snaps where you saw one was Jason Adamiolo, and I forget who the other one was, where they literally just ran right past the quarterback, and he steps right up underneath him and takes off running. You can't do that, right?
Yep.
And that's just execution. That's not a scheme problem. It's an execution problem. And it's just a guy being too aggressive, which I get, right? Push them and then spin back out or something like that, but that's what they need to do, not keep a spy. I don't need a spy. I want that spy dropping underneath the in cut. Because if you have a spy there, he's going to bang in cuts and bang crossers and do all that other kind of stuff. Because you've got now a fifth guy doing nothing but looking at the quarterback. I don't think that's the way. Jaron Hall's a good athlete. He's not that kind of weapon where you need to do that, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I think that for me, we talk about this all the time. Defensive line needs to finish at the quarterback. Get off of blocks. Let's get Jaron Hall on the ground if you're Notre Dame, right? But the other thing too, Brian, is I think that this is a game where Jaron Hall is playing at a really high level. So I think mix and match and coverage is a big thing this week. You don't have to play spy, but if you mix in a little bit of zone coverage, your eyes are going to be back toward the quarterback naturally if you're a second level defender and a secondary defender just in general as well. So mixing and matching, man and zone. He's not a kid that I just want to run man against all day because if his back is to the quarterback, that's where he's going to hurt you as an extender. So finish on the quarterback, mix and match zone and man. I think you'll be fine. I agree, Brian. The spy thing I think is really overplayed. People are always like, oh, just throw a spy out there. But if you throw a spy, it also means that you have one less pass coverage player. And what Jaron Hall does best is he's a passer, right? It's not he's a running threat who can also pass. He's a passer that can also be an extender at times, right? He's that type of dude. So let's cover the pass first, then we'll worry about Jaron Hall. You can mix and match man and zone, and I think you could get that out of the way.
Yep, absolutely. Ian Johnson with Super Chat, no special teams matchup, the third phase of the game. No, we're not, because special teams is going to be real easy. Do your job, don't give up big plays. That's it. Plus, no one wants to, not enough people. You're not going to understand. We're going to always give you honest analysis, but there does come some strategy of what we talk about because it's got to be something that people will want to listen to, right? And so we always give people, you got to cover basketball. Okay, cool. We'll do basketball articles. And then nobody 20 people will watch a We had Tom Noy on last year to preview the basketball team. It was a great interview. It had like 100 listens. Tom does a great job. There's just not the interest there. And that's some things that we got to kind of factor into when we make these decisions. Rob Osgood said, this might sound strange, but I don't care about winning by 10, 15, or 20. This game to me is a test to see what and who this team is. This Notre Dame team is right now. I have no idea. This game will tell me a lot. I agree, but I do think whether they win by 10 or 15 or 20 is going to be part of that evaluation process. The big key is just get a W. If you win by 1, you're going to, then that's fine. Then you go out and beat Stanford next week and beat, all of a sudden you're 5-2 and back in the top 25 for sure. And the way this season is going, you might even be in top 20 by then, the way this season is going, Ryan. And then you get healthy going into the Syracuse and Clemson matchups. Reed Crosby is a BYU fan that joined the show. He says, I saw the Notre Dame receivers have something like 390 yards all year. Is this because of the quarterback situation, lack of trust, lack of talent, or just offensive scheme? It's kind of, I don't think there's a lack of talent. I keep saying this. There's not a lack of talent. There's a lack of depth of talent, right? And then there's a lack of using all of your talent. It's been partly the receivers not playing well. It's been partly them not using the receivers well. And part of it, too, has been the offensive line, and part of it's been the quarterback. Look, there was like Braden Lindsey sucks again thing here today. And I'm like, look, if Notre Dame's quarterbacks were accurate, Braden Lindsey would have like 400 yards right now. Yeah, there's some plays he doesn't make on throws that you're like, that's not a ball you should be throwing to Braden Lindsey. You shouldn't be throwing Braden Lindsey a back shoulder one-on-one. That's not who he is. But he was open for a 75-yard touchdown at the end of the first half against Marshall. He would have had the game-winning, game-clinching touchdown against Marshall if Buckner read it right. He blows past the guy who squats and blows past what should have been the easiest 30-yard touchdown of his career. Quarterback doesn't get it. He runs by Ohio State guy by like 3 or 4 yards. You remember the play I'm talking about in the third quarter, Ryan? Where he runs that wide fade and just smokes the dude off the line. And Buckner sees it, and as soon as Buckner gets to the top of his drop, linebacker comes in and drills him right in the face. Y'all don't see that on TV. But when I'm at the game, I see it. Ryan watches the All-22. He sees it. And what I said when you had to dip out, Ryan, is if the quarterbacks and the offensive line were playing well this season, he'd have at least 400 or 500 yards right now, in my opinion. You just look at the place he's been open and on a small number of catches, right? Yeah. I mean, he would have at least 130 against Marshall.
He'd have like five or six touchdowns right now, too,
yes.
To be honest. Like,
yes. Yeah. Yes. Now, has he made plays in some of those instances where he has that opportunity? No, but those are not the kind of throws where he's going to be making those plays.
100%.
And so he's not Will Fuller, but he's better than a lot of you give him credit for. He can't throw the ball to himself. I mean, that's the reality of it. He can't throw the ball to himself. And I would encourage some of you who say he doesn't ever get open, if you've only watched a game on TV, you should probably not be having that conversation. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but on TV, you just can't see certain things. You just can't. And he was also open on a play against Cal where he got open over the middle on that third down that they didn't get, and Drew Pine throws it behind him. If Drew just hits him like right here, that's a 20-yard completion for Braden. He did his job. Quarterback didn't do his. And that's been happening to him a lot this year, to be honest with you.
Yep.
We Are Not Marshall asks Brian and Ryan, who is the X factor on offense and defense? Can be units or individuals versus BYU. Let's go with individuals, Ryan. I think for the purpose of this, I think it'd be more fun. Who is the X factor on offense and the X factor on defense against BYU? Let's start with the offense. What say you?
Offense, it's an interesting one. I think that for me, it has to be a wide receiver. I really think I think it does, because I think that you see the running back. Like, it's not an X factor to pick any of the running backs right now after what they've been doing the last couple weeks and what they did last week, right? I think that it has to be a wide receiver. Who that is, I'm not really sure. Like, maybe it's Braden Lindsey, maybe it's Lorenzo Styles. I don't really know who the X factor is right now, Brian, honestly. But I think that it has to be a wide receiver in this game, because that's the next step in the maturation. The offensive line's getting better. The running backs are getting used better. Drew Pine had a better game last week. Michael Mayer is Michael Mayer. Need a wide receiver or two to really step up and be that guy at some point. And I just think that that's going to be a big key in this game.
Yep. I think it's offensively. I think it's a pass. To me, it's going to be a pass game weapon that we haven't seen yet. Whether that's Braden Lindsey, whether that's Eli Raridan, Tobias Merriweather, somebody ripping off a couple big plays that forces BYU to change how they're defending them, that's not Michael Mayer or Lorenzo Styles. Because I think they'll have a plan for those two guys, right? And so we're kind of on the same page, Ryan. I would just say that it could also be a second tight end, right? Would give the same impact that what you're talking about, right? Like if they're not playing it, Eli Raridan and Holden Stace combined for 6 catches for 90 yards because they didn't play him, something like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I think you and I are coming at it from the same point. Somebody's got to step up in the pass game that's not your two dudes to really help you out. I think that's a big part of it. Mm-hmm. And so defensively, you know who it is for me defensively? I'm going to say this. For me defensively, the key to this game is going to be Isaiah Foskey.
Okay.
My concern is because BYU has big, long tackles. Whenever Foskey has had issues, and it's been rare, it's been against big, long tackles. Saw it against Marshall, saw it against Ohio State, saw it against Cincinnati last year to a degree. Cincinnati was partly they had some length there, but also partly because they schemed. They just said, we're not going to let him beat us, which is why some other guys had some success. He's got to play. He's got to play like he did the last two. He was a monster the last 2 games. I mean, I still think North Carolina game was arguably the best game of his career. Now, statistically, it wasn't there, but he was so good in every aspect of the game. If he can do that and have some success, because like you said, we haven't seen him really do that get low and around a guy that he was really good with last year. Mm-hmm. That's something that Freeland could have some problems with because you mentioned he's really long, but he doesn't bend well. I can see Isaiah getting under his hands and having some success there. Yep. And then, of course, against the other kid, he should have a speed advantage on. I think if he can have a big game, it's going to force Jaren Hall into the arms of some other guys a lot. And it's going to force Jaren Hall to be very uncomfortable in the pocket. If you can make Jaren Hall uncomfortable in the pocket, that is going to be a big thing. And so I think Isaiah is the key to me. And I wanted to say Benjamin Morrison, matched up against Puka because they're going to go left. Notre Dame goes field boundary. So he's going to be matched up in the boundary at times if Puka plays, and we'll have a comment here down there on that. But I wanted to say Brandon Joseph because I just have a feeling Brandon Joseph is gonna be a guy that's going to be heavily involved in this game. I wanted to say Marist, but I think Isaiah has to have a big game. And if you can be disruptive against Jaren Hall, this offense is going to have a tough time for BYU.
I already talked about mine earlier for the second part of this, Brian, for defense. Mine's Riley Mills. Again, I think that whether he's working on the edge or interior, I think he has clear advantages in this game. Like I think that he has the advantage from power perspective against Blake Freeland if he's matched up against him, pass rush wise and on just in the run game. And I think when he's inside against these guards, Barrington and Clark Barrington and LaChance, I think that he has quickness advantages all over the place. Mm-hmm. So I think Riley Mills working inside and out is an ultimate X factor in this game because I think he has advantages everywhere he plays.
Yep. Donovan O'Mara, thank you, Donovan, for this question. Hopefully we can match this is a comment, which I agree with. Hopefully we can match the intensity because BYU is going to come out ready to play with energy. There's no doubt. You're going to have – now, that is one thing I'll say. Other than the Marshall game, energy and intensity is not something I've questioned about Notre Dame all year. They didn't lose to Ohio State because they weren't intense and didn't play with energy. They didn't execute. They didn't lose to Cal – they didn't play Cal tough or maybe not as tough as they should have because they didn't play with intensity and energy. They didn't execute. Same with North Carolina. They didn't give up those big plays late because they weren't intense and didn't play with energy. They came out pretty fired up against North Carolina. I have been very impressed with Marcus Freeman's ability in 5 games to get his team to come out and play really with a lot of energy early. The exception was the Marshall game, which lesson learned for him because that was a big – you put a lot into that game, into the Ohio State game, and then to lose that way, maybe he didn't quite know just how his team was going to react that next game. But other than that, this Notre Dame team has come out and played with way more energy than we've seen and intensity than we've seen from the previous coach on both sides of the ball, Ryan. That is something now, did they play like garbage against Ohio State offensively, but they competed against Ohio State. They just didn't execute for junk. But it's not like they weren't playing hard. They weren't trying. I've never questioned this team's want to outside of the Marshall game. And even the Marshall game, it wasn't like they played soft. They just clearly weren't focused in that game. They had terrible, but they didn't. It's not that they didn't play hard. They just had no focus. Because again, I think it was because of the previous game. Got another super chat from Wicked Bronco Productions. If we get Jeremiah Love, Jade Lamar, Brandon Hillman, and Donovan Edwards, does Tyree come back or any guys transfer? It also does Joseph, Hart, and Foskey say. Let me address this real quick. Yep. Dylan Edwards is not being recruited as a running back, and Brandon Hillman is not being recruited as a running back. The only way Brandon Hillman will play running back is if they don't get Jeremiah Love or Jade Lamar decides not to sign with Notre Dame. As of right now, Jade Lamar is planning on signing with Notre Dame. Now, he is going to take some visits, and we'll see about that, and we'll have some updates on that. Our stance on Jeremiah Love has been the same all along. We'll have some comments on that here in the next few weeks about that. We feel good there, but the other two guys are not running backs, and none of those guys are going to force Chris Tyree not to be brought back.
Yep.
He's been your best running back so far, in my opinion. Chris Tyree will be back. He's only a junior. No guys will transfer because none of those guys are going to come out and beat those guys out right away. Where's Audric Estime going to go? Now, could Logan Diggs transfer? Sure. Like Logan Diggs is just going to be a guy that I'm worried about every year until he's done playing, until his eligibility's up. I'm just going to, because that's just kind of, where he is right now, being homesick and all that kind of stuff. I hope he stays. I love Logan Diggs as a player. I hope he stays, but I'm always going to be worried about him. But it's never going to be because of some incoming freshman. It's just going to be Jadarian Price beats him out, Tyree beats him out, and Estime beats him out. It won't be because of this recruiting class, which is very good, by the way. It's just he'll be a junior and they'll be freshmen. He's going to have the advantage, and he's really good. And I think Jeremiah Love is more of a Chris Tyree type of back with how he is used, run and pass game, than he is an Audric Estime type of back, in my opinion.
Can we just enjoy recruiting for a little bit too? Can we start thinking about what the negative connotations is to it, right? Like, oh, this guy's got to leave now. This guy's got to leave now. Can we just enjoy that Notre Dame is recruiting the position well,
and that players on the Notre Dame team are not afraid of competition, and because they signed a top player, the other guys are going to leave? Like Bama does this all the time. They sign big time recruits, and the guys currently on the team don't leave.
Yep.
Right. So does Brandon Joseph, Cam Hart, and Isaiah Foskey stay? I don't see any chance in heck of Isaiah Foskey coming back next year.
Yeah, I doubt Isaiah Foskey. The latter two, Brandon Joseph and Cam Hart's going to be interesting, right? Yeah. And again, I'm going to have a little draft analysis coming up from sources around the NFL about Cam Hart specifically, and maybe a little bit more about Brandon Joseph in the near future. But as of right now, I don't think either one has played up to the standard that we thought they could possibly play at least the highest expectation. So I wouldn't be shocked if either one came back, but it's something that's not going to be determined until after the season, obviously.
Yep. Zach Martin, one of the linebackers who have a 5th or 6th year, who are you for sure keeping, and who are you having a deeper discussion about? So Bo Bauer cannot come back, so he's not a conversation. The rest of the linebackers can. Jack Kaiser could, J.D. Bertrand could, and obviously Maris could. I'm definitely bringing Maris back. Yep. Probably bringing J.D. Bertrand back. The guy that I'd want to have a conversation about is Jack Kaiser. If I have the numbers, I'm bringing Jack back. Mm-hmm. Like, I want him back. As long as he's willing to compete for his job, because I'm not handing it to him. And if he's okay, like if you get beat out, are you going to be okay being a rotation guy and not a starter? As long as he's okay with those two things, I'd love to have Jack Kaiser back if I have room. If you get title numbers between Jack and J.D. Bertrand, you're going to have to make a tough decision, in my opinion.
Yep.
That's how I feel about it.
Maris is definitely one, though. I'm 100% bringing him back. Not even thinking second about that one. Yeah. I agree. I would as long as JD wants to come back, I'll take JD back. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
He's got to promise me he's going to stop getting ejected for targeting. That's such a fluky thing. You know what I mean? It's such a fluky thing. But yeah, I would bring, and JD's a captain too, right? I mean, so there's a leadership aspect involved in that I would want to bring back. And JD Bertrand also strikes me as the kind of kid that if somebody flat beats him out, he wouldn't be okay with it, in that, he would still want to compete and battle, but he's not going to be like all mad and become a cancer in the locker. You're like, look, this kid's really good. He beat me out, right? But hey, what's my role? Let me go play my role. He just strikes me as that kind of kid. He's going to compete his butt off to not get beat out. So it's not like I'm saying like, he doesn't count. I'm cool. Hey, beat me out. It's all good. I'm going to hang out back here. That's not what I'm saying. Right. It's just some guys get beat out and they get all in their feelings because it's not fair. Other guys are like, dude, this kid was better than me. Like I did the best I could, and this kid just makes more plays than me, and et cetera, et cetera. But I still have a role to play. And, like Drew Pine. Drew Pine could have got in his feelings when Tyler Buckner beat him out, but he didn't. He stayed locked in and ready for when his number was called, and cheered Tyler on every step of the way. And just like Tyler has done with Drew, that's the kind of kid you want. Was Drew Pine happy that he wasn't a starter? Of course he wasn't happy. Of course he thought he should have started or at least wanted to start. But he's a team guy. Not all kids are that way, right? And you want to roll with those kids, but that's a conversation you have to have when you bring a guy back for a 5th or 6th year, Ryan, because not all those kids are that way. And you got to make sure that a kid has that kind of attitude before you bring him back, especially a kid who's been a starter. If you're going to, there's a chance he may not start and he's not going to be happy about it. You got to be careful. Like, look, that may just be best for you to move on. But I think we could see some transfers from Notre Dame this offseason because I think Notre Dame's going to keep loading up with it. I still think they're going to get to 27 or at least close to it.
I keep saying that, man. People keep asking for the numbers. I keep saying 26 to 27, I think is the number. Yeah. And I mean, would it shock you if they got to 28? Like, I don't think that would shock me.
It wouldn't shock me. It would require an upset. Like, okay, they're at 22 right now. Yep. I think they still want a quarterback. They still want Jeremiah Love.
Sure.
They still want another receiver. That's 3 right there. That's 25. They are recruiting offensive linemen. If the right guy comes along to replace Elijah Page, that would be 4. They still are trying to get another defensive end, right, in this class as well. Plus, you have Brandon Hillman, where's he going to play? Wherever he wants if he comes, right? I mean, wherever we have a need. So that's what 5 right there. That's 27, right? So, could they get a 28th? Maybe.
It's possible.
But, like if a Samuel pull off an upset with a Samuel and Pemba or something late, maybe something like that. But I still think 26, 27 is the target.
I think so
at this
too.
point in time.
Yep.
Patrick Quinlan with a super chat. Thank you, Patrick. I know this has been discussed ad nauseum, but I would like to hear your thoughts on what Tom Reese said about the usage of Tobias Merriweather yesterday. I am really glad that I did not listen to that press conference did not happen before our show yesterday because I would have gone off.
Oh no!
Basically, did you hear it, Ryan?
I didn't hear this.
He basically said, "Hey, we had a package. It just the game flow didn't get him there," which I think is stupid. Here's the thing that I will say.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's on you as the offensive coordinator to make sure that something you worked on in practice gets used in a game. I can't stand that game flow stuff. And it's nonsense to me. Plus, the other part of it is that's bad coaching because why are you practicing on stuff? Do you know how much reps you have to do with something to have a package for a guy?
Yep.
And you used all those reps for a package and you didn't use them. That means you didn't make the best use of your practice time. Either way, that's a bad answer for me.
Yeah.
It's not a good answer. And so as a coach, I'm like, well, then why are we practicing a package for this kid if we're not going to use it? What are we doing? Right. And then it's just the same old stuff. He's got to do this. He's got to do that. I'm so sick and tired of that. I'm so sick and tired of it. Like there is some truth to it when it comes to the volume of how much a kid plays.
Sure.
But for a kid like Tobias Merriweather to only get 4 snaps in 4 games, barring him just being a delinquent, which he is not at all, or a kid who doesn't work, which isn't accurate at all, according to no one, unless there's some extenuating circumstances that makes him an untrustworthy kid as a human being, there's no excuse not to play him already. None.
Mm-hmm.
There's just none. Now, is he the focal point of your offense? No, not saying that. But he needs to play. And it's just as simple as that, man. It's as simple as that. I mean, there's no excuses for it. None. No excuses for it. So he needs to play. So I don't like what he said, but I'm tired of talking about it. He needs to play him. Freaking play the kid. Stop with all this excuses. Play him. He's too good not to have a role. And if you can't get him ready, then that's a you problem. And I'll say it again. And I'm not going to say anymore because I don't want to go on another tangent because I talked about it yesterday.
The package thing also makes it worse. For being honest, it makes it worse. Yeah. I'd rather just be like, yeah, he's not ready. And I'd be like, all right, I don't agree, but okay. I don't know.
Right. He's good enough for you to work on a package for him, but then you just decide not to use it for game flow. That doesn't even mean. That's coach speak for, I don't want you to ask more about this.
Yes.
Is what that is. Anyway. All right. Let's see here. This is from Corey Flynn. Corey said, my Mormon father-in-law who listens to their sports talk daily says that Puka Nacua probably isn't playing. That would be a huge loss for BYU. Now, I had heard that he probably was gonna play, but that was a couple days ago. So if there's a shot that if he doesn't play, that hurts them big. They are not the same team when he doesn't play. To your point, just looking at him, it's the Michael Mayer comparison that you made earlier. Mm-hmm. Now, is he as good of a player as Michael Mayer? No. But the impact he has on that offense is very similar, meaning they're very different players, but you take him out, like he is the guy you build your pass game around. Mm-hmm. There's a reason their offense struggled against Baylor and Oregon without him, Ryan, because he's a legit player. I mean, to me, if he's healthy, he's a kid that gets drafted. As long as he tests well, he's a legitimate. Like if he wanted to transfer to Notre Dame, I'd take him in a heartbeat.
100%.
Like, I mean, he's a good football player. If he doesn't play, that's a huge loss for them.
Washington, because obviously that's where he was before. Washington's been recruiting wide receiver pretty well over the last couple of years, huh? With Jalen McMillan and what is the name? Odonzo?
Rome. Like you had Terrell Bynum that transferred to USC. They've definitely recruited that position well, and they had Puka. And like you said, it's not like he didn't play there.
Yeah.
I mean, he in 3 games in 2020, because, they only played 3 and 4 games in the Pac-12 that year. He had 9 catches for 151 yards that year.
Yeah.
I mean, as a freshman in 8 games, he had 7 catches for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? I mean, so this kid can play. This kid can play. And he had 3 catches for 43 yards and a touchdown against number 5 Oregon that year in a 5-point loss from Washington. So, the kid can play. Kid's really good. Really good. Really good football player. So if they don't have him, Ryan, that changes a lot about, because now it's just a bunch of, you have the big kid, you have the tight end who's really big, and Keanu Hill who's really big. You can maybe win some jump balls with, but there is not a lot of speed. And I mean, who's the guy that scares you to take the top off the defense, other than just you throw a bomb up and Keanu Hill outplays 2 guys for the ball? Who is that guy if Puku is not in there?
Yeah, I mean, because Gunnar Robney's like an intermediate separator. Chase Roberts is an outside the numbers technician of a route runner. Like there's not that guy, to your point. There's not.
Yep. Let's see here. Here's a good one from Irish Mojo. Will Ryan be doing an NFL scouting draft report on each eligible player for the draft? When we get closer to the draft, absolutely. And there's a couple other things that Ryan and I are talking about with the comes to the draft, but we're gonna hold off on that stuff for now, but we'll have some stuff to discuss. But yes, as we get closer to the draft, Ryan will be doing a lot more. If Notre Dame has guys at the Senior Bowl, we'll have him down there as well. So yes, we'll definitely take advantage of his draft. But it's just, Ryan, through 5 games, it's just really, I don't really care much about. I mean, there's good info, like, okay, how are you viewed now? But like, no one should be making decisions on kids based off of 4 or 5 games. I mean, there's still a lot of games to play, and that's good or bad. I mean, if a quarterback's playing great 3-4 games into the season, and then, like, remember when Kenny the Thrill Hill, and everybody
Kenny Trill?
Yeah, Kenny Trill. And he comes out as like first couple games, he's like, looks great. And then like, what happened to him? Like, this kid's really good. And then all of a sudden it's like, kid stinks. Like, how about we let these things play out for a little bit.
You mean I can't overreact over 1 game?
No,
Brian,
I know how much you love Twitter. To do that.
I'm on Twitter. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. Let's see here. Cole Barker says, how much better, in your opinion, is Merriweather over the starting crew of wide receivers, if any? I mean, just from a God-given ability standpoint, the only guy on the roster that has a chance to be able to say he's in the same league as Tobias is Lorenzo Styles. That's it. And they're different players. But just as far as just raw talent, he's the best they have. Now, having said that, in the coach's defense, just being talented doesn't mean you should. I don't think Tobias should play just because he's talented.
Yep.
But I had sources in Notre Dame talking about how he knows the offense and all this other. It's like you can't. I don't know if they can go into a game and, like, I've heard coach say this, not Notre Dame necessarily or anyone in the current side, but I don't know if I can trust him on Saturdays. Well, how the heck are you going to know if you don't play him?
Right.
Like, how can I, like, every single kid that ever played at some point in time had to prove himself on a Saturday, right? I mean, every single one. So except get a guy in that is a transfer that proved it somewhere else. Like, you guys have to, you've got to give a kid a chance to play.
The greatest point I've ever heard you make, Brian, was that, okay, the trust thing, whatever, it's a kind of a bogus excuse to me, right?
Sure.
But you said this, and I agree with you 100% before. You said has what you've seen out of Notre Dame's wide receivers given you trust in them? Like, who has gained your trust that it's just like you can throw a kid out because you don't trust him? Like, that's just, yeah.
Like I said, I could understand it if we're in 2018 and we're talking about Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, and Chris Fink.
And they're balling.
I get it. I get it. Or even 2015 with Will Fuller, Chris Brown, I would still not like it. The kid should still play. You don't need to start him because those guys are really good, but you still give them 10 to 15 snaps a game. But even then, you'd be like, you know what? I get it because those are all like potential NFL players. And Chris Fink plays a different position than Tobias, right? I mean, and was really good in 2018. I mean, Chris Fink was a really good football player in 2018 and a great compliment to the other guys that they had. And yet Alizé at tight end and all that. But even then, I'd still say the kid should play at least as a rotation guy, get him some opportunities in case one of those guys gets hurt, and then he's got to become the guy. But right now, there's nobody on the field, even Lorenzo Styles, who's your best guy at receiver. And I shouldn't even do that because he is their best receiver. He is their most talented guy of the non-freshmen. He's a very talented kid. He's just not playing very well. Hopefully he can build on the Carolina game. But a lot of that was they put a lot of focus on him. And so to me, even with Lorenzo, Tobias needs to play. I'm so sick of talking about this every year. And it's at this position. This is the position where it's primarily been an issue for me. But we've seen it at running back. I know for a fact that there were coaches on the Notre Dame staff that were begging Brian Kelly to let them play Kyren Williams in 2019. Begging him. Because A, they had no depth at running back. When they played Georgia, the only healthy running back they had, the only two healthy running backs they had were Kyren and Tony Jones. That's it. That's why they didn't try to run the ball that game because they were like, well, we only have one running back. Right? If he gets hurt, we have no running backs because we're not allowed to use Kyren. It was a head coach decision, not a running backs coach, not an offensive coordinator decision. That was a head coach decision. Why? Why would you ever redshirt a running back that early in the season? Well, he dropped the ball against Louisville. Oh, so other dudes dropped balls that game too, not just him. Right? And because Jafar Armstrong got hurt the week before, and Jameer Smith and Sebo Flemister were both hurt and couldn't play. And just decided to go play Georgia with one running back because the head coach didn't want to play Kyren Williams. So this isn't just, remember when Brian Kelly in 2020 almost lost it. When Brian Kelly said that, Chris Tyree's just here to give Kyren a breather. Your 4-3 athlete just here to give him a breather. It doesn't play against Clemson in the ACC title game until late in the game, right? And they finally give him he had one carry against Clemson in the title game. You know what he did with that one carry? He went 20-plus yards for a touchdown. Doesn't play hardly at all against Syracuse, and then finally gets the ball late. What's he do? 94-yard touchdown run. Like, it predates this current head coach. But it's been a problem on offense for years. For years. Well, Michael Mayer. Michael Mayer is the exception, not the rule. So, whatever. Anyway, I'm tired of talking about it. And that's and Coach Freeman's the one that's going to have to step in and fix this. If Coach Reese isn't willing to do it, and I hope he is. I hope Coach Reese decides, you know what, we got to get this kid on the field this week. If he doesn't, then Coach Freeman's got to step in and say, play the kid. It's not a request. It's a demand. And that's what head coaches do. You're the head coach. It needs to happen because you're not only going to hurt yourself now with Tobias, you're going to hurt yourself recruiting. Right? Because Washington's going to be like, hey, look what we're doing. Like they got a top 100 dude over there and they don't even play the kid, right? I guarantee he'd play for us. And that would kind of be how it would go. So anyway, Ryan, Cole says, is this Tommy or Coach? This is 100% on Tommy Reese. 100%. From everything I've been told from multiple sources, this is 100% a Tommy Reese decision. He doesn't think he's ready. So he doesn't play him. So anyway, that's going to do it for today. Ryan, good show. I really enjoyed this. We're going to be back tomorrow for our Keys to Victory show. Tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk at 6 p.m. Eastern. You're going to have Sean Stiers and Vince D'Addario. We'll have their Wednesday mailbag. So you definitely check that out. Hit up the website at irishbreakdown.com. We have a lot of BYU Notre Dame breakdowns. You definitely want to check that out. And, of course, check out the IB message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. Share this podcast. And share with other people about what we do. I had a guy the other day who was like, I was having a debate with a Notre Dame friend, and he was saying this, and he goes, I probably should have told him he needs to listen to IB. And I'm like, yeah, you do, for sure. So not just share the podcast, but share your knowledge of what we do here with other people, because we're always trying to grow and always trying to build what we're doing. So Ryan, great show today. Great job today. Really appreciate you. Thank you all very much for being with us today. And we will talk to you again tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.